And we're meeting, and I wish to recognize that all of our municipal operations are located on the territory of the Sault Nation. I would bang my gavel loudly, but that would likely be irritating to all of you wearing headphones. So just want to give a shout out and a thank you to all of our healthcare workers and essential workers out there as it's 7 o'clock. So as we do this, I'm going to stick with the general alphabetical order, and we'll sort of go to the next person on the list as we go through this. And it may seem redundant. If you have nothing to say, just say pass. I just find it's easier for me just to do it that way. I am still a bit of a creature of habit here, so bear with me. So on that note, I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's agenda as it's circulated. Moved by Councillor St-Pierre, seconded by Councillor BYLAWS. Any questions or corrections? None? All those in favor? Opposed? No one's opposed. It's carried unanimously. We have meeting minutes here for adoption from the regular council meeting of April the 14th. Looking to move adoption by Councillor Logans and seconded by Councillor St-Pierre. Are there any questions or corrections? No, there's none. Everything's good. Okay, so I'll call the question then on adoption. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Item number 7 then is report of the Chief Administrative Officer. So over to Mr. McInnes, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Basically, just a little bit of an update on the COVID situation mostly tonight. So the EOC is still operating and ready to respond to COVID matters, but most things are being directed back to the district departments and being dealt with at the department level. This week I'll be asking the EOC director to turn his attention to recovery planning in anticipation of Premier Horgan's outlining the provincial reopening plan. So some changes will be required in the way that we physically space employees and how we serve the public. Our reopening strategy will continue to meet the requirements of the public health orders. In a BC follows the lead of other provinces like Saskatchewan, we can expect to see a phased reopening with many of the services offered by local governments to be in the early phases. Our planning will include direction from the province on council meetings and committee meetings, and perhaps we'll have a schedule soon after the provincial plan is announced. Our recently created work from home policy will be reviewed again on May 8th after the provincial reopening plan is announced. This will consider what the provincial plan says about local government services. We'll be having all of our staff that have been working from home complete a survey in order to collect information on their experiences and ways to improve this service provision in this way if required again in the future. We will likely be challenged to meet some of the physical distancing requirements for some staff, particularly the ones that are share office spaces. So some working from home likely will continue for the short term anyway. And that's my update for tonight. I'll answer any other questions or any questions on that if there are any.
Okay, any questions for Mr. McInnes? No, see none. So thank you very much for that update. Okay, next up is item 8, public question and comment. So in this case, I'll ask our corporate officer to read out any correspondence that's been received today related to tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've received 2 public input comments that I will read aloud for you. The first is from the president of the Sault Fine Arts Society, Eileen Badiak, and that is in response to item 9.1, report of the 2020 to 2024 5-year financial plan amendments. And their comments are as following. As with many events this year, the Sault Fine Arts Show will be undergoing a transformation from a live event to a virtual one. This will enable us to continue to meet our goal of supporting the art and artists from Sauk region and beyond. To accomplish this, we are undertaking a complete redesign of our current online presence with the intent of hosting as many of the components of the live show as possible. Our aim is to use this new design to augment future live shows. We plan to be back with renewed vigor for next year's 35th anniversary show. The district's continued support is important to us financially. We need to show that support in order to have continued funding from other federal and provincial sources. Your ongoing commitment to the Society allows us to maintain our ability to showcase Sauk and the surrounding region as an arts and cultural destination for tourists and locals alike. We can appreciate that this is a challenging time for all, and we thank you for your consideration. The second piece of correspondence is from Mrs. Ellen Lewers in relation to 2 agenda items. The first one is agenda item 9.2, the update on development procedures during COVID-19 pandemic. And her comments are as follows. We should not be taking away from the public the opportunity to express concerns, ask questions, etc. for any development, zoning change, or OCP changes. Public input should be implemented in all cases. Do not use this present situation to change bylaws which may become permanent. How do you know staff has all the information via development, permit, etc.? The public always seems to have some extra info which has not been written or in any documents held by the district. This is a dangerous curve to flatten. Her second comment is on agenda item 11.1, notice of motion. As per the agricultural plan, there are some changes needed in that as well. It was not too vetted by the public. Although I agree with a lot of it in principle, there are changes needed. Her submission did contain additional information that does not apply to the agenda and therefore will not be read aloud under public input. It has been provided to all members of council for information. That's the extent of the public input.
Okay, thank you very much for reading those out tonight, Ms. Mushada. Okay, so that brings us to item 9.1, reports, the 2020-2024 5-year financial plan amendments. So I'll turn this over to staff. There's a very thorough report, but perhaps our staff, Ms. Gray or Mr. McInnes, can walk us through the report.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as you stated, I've kind of tried to provide as much detail as possible in the report. So just kind of to summarize what the recommendations are. As you know, we started with the 4% property tax increase, and council's desire was to try and get that down, if at all possible, for 2020. So I consulted with the various departments, discussed with the CAO, and came up with some potential options to reduce the 2020 property tax increase. Something to keep in mind for some of these, reducing the fee for this year, or sorry, reducing the expense for this year will push the expense to 2021. So just to kind of keep, like, for example, the OCP, the budget won't change for the OCP. It's just going to kind of move from 2020 to 2021, for example. Other things like professional development won't increase over and above for the next year. It's just a 1-year reduction. First few items we looked at were revenue items. So as I mentioned in the development of the original budget, the building permit revenue was slated to increase this year based on the fact that we historically have been collecting more than usual, as well as the new fees were adopted by council at the starting beginning of this year. So that was anticipating an increase in revenue, which was reflected in the original budget. But just to be conservative, it's recommended to reduce that budget down $50,000, just because it's still a little bit unknown, the effects from the COVID on our building permits. They are still coming in, but there is the risk that they could taper off over the summer. So just until we know a little more, that's the recommendation there. At this time, no changes are recommended in the penalties and interest. As I stated, it's not a huge moneymaker for the district. Thankfully, almost 95% of our residents and businesses pay on time, so that's nice. And most of the interest is just from a couple that have quite large receivables with the district. So unless council desires to change the residential penalty date, then at this time I wouldn't recommend any changes in that line item. The next one is the investment income, and so that's was usually kind of a conservative budget as well. So this one, it's recommended to increase it up to $100,000 from the current budget. This one makes me a little more nervous only because we just don't know what our returns are going to be on our investment and how much of our cash flow we might need to access prior to the end of the year until people start paying their property taxes. So that one's just a little bit of an unknown right now, and the rates of returns. I am talking to MFA about how our funds are currently invested and expect some information kind of next week on some recommendations they may have for just changing our portfolio right now that we currently have. So this one, I mean, we could increase it up to $100,000, or my preference would be to just increase it $50,000 and just net out the loss in the investment income, or sorry, in the building permit revenue. And then I'll just kind of quickly summarize the expenses and then leave it open to questions for you guys, for council. So for the expenses, as stated at the previous council meeting, council resolved to eliminate the community grant program for the 1 year. So that resulted in $65,000 of savings. Council's travel is being reduced by $15,000, basically cut the budget in half just to reflect the reduced amount of travel that likely will be occurring in 2020 for council. The fire department identified various expense reductions for a grand total of $28,000. And that's just, there was kind of many little line items. And the biggest chunk was for the fire appreciation dinner budget, which was reduced by $12,000. And legislative services has $9,000. They were going to hire a student, summer student this year, but we've been hearing that the federal government may fully fund those, whereas in prior years the district had to contribute as well. So just removing that from the budget, and if the funding doesn't come through, then the student won't be hired for this year. CAO's budget is the $50,000 moving of the OCP budget from 2020 to 2021. Office administration, we can reduce the property maintenance budget. It did increase quite a bit this year because we're trying to strategically undertake some of the repairs recommended in the building condition assessment. So just realistically, since we've kind of lost a couple months of momentum on that, we can probably drop it down and just commit to less building maintenance projects for 2020. Overall, I thought it would be too wordy to kind of list every department, but overall it's recommended just reducing the professional development budget for various departments combined for a $15,000 reduction. And this is just a reflection of how much training that staff will actually be able to undertake this year. Some of them were going to be in person, some training will be changed to virtual. But then there'll be different costs associated with that, because in the past, if staff might have had to travel to Vancouver or Up Island or something for a course, now that won't be happening if these are happening, the services or the courses are being offered remotely. And then another option as well is just delaying the hiring of the 2 new positions that were funded in this year's budget. They had already been prorated to have a May start date. So if we bump that back by a couple months or 4 months, as I've stated, it saves about $18,000 a month in salaries and benefits in the budget. But again, kind of going with the strategy and to help council kind of achieve the strategic plan goals, it's essential for us to try and fill these positions as soon as possible and get a full complement of staff working for the district and helping council achieve the goals in the strategic plan there. Another option as well is to reduce the capital projects that are funded with property tax income. So this year, 2020 identified 2 projects being funded with property tax income for $120,000. So the option could be to defer these projects to later years. And if that's the case, then it basically just will, it's not that the project isn't necessary, it's just going to move it to a future year, 2021 or 2022, depending on the project. So that would be another option as well, is just to not have any funded. And that would happen through not necessarily eliminating the projects, just deferring them to a future year. So a few projects have been identified. There's any of the other capital projects as well could be considered for deferment if necessary, because another pro to the deferring the capital projects is would be to leave some additional funds in our reserve funds, because as stated by the province, there is the ability to borrow against these reserve funds if cash flow becomes an issue down the road. So kind of leaving some funds in there for 2020 might not be a bad idea, whereas unfortunately right now we're kind of depleting the reserve funds more than we would like to. And then another request from council was just kind of following up with the light items as at the meeting where the community grants were discussed. So since then, staff have followed up with the service agreements, which again are different contracts there. Service agreements are signed contracts until 2022 with organizations, and it commits the district to fund at certain values, a base value plus 2% every year for most of them up until 2022. So we've reached out to those organizations, and most of them say they're continuing to run status quo, providing services as they normally do to the community. I've spoken with, since this report was drafted, I've heard back from the EMCS regarding the theater seats, and they have confirmed that they would be able to order them this year. So that would be their hope, is to order them this year and hopefully get them installed before, and received and installed before school begins in September. And then the other line items, I mean, I don't need to go through them all unless you would like me to, but the only one basically that kind of wasn't sure, I heard back from Wildlife Souk as well, sorry, to jump around there. I heard back from Wildlife Souk since the writing of this report, and they provided some information on what they will be using the funds for, and it's very similar to the information that was presented to council a few meetings ago, where they appeared as a delegation requesting some additional funding. So it's just about community engagement and brochures and things like that. So they anticipate that still proceeding as usual this year. The biggest line item on here, of course, is the Souk Canada Day for $30,000. So Mr. McInnes reached out to the Lions and just basically, we're just trying to confirm, they would like some direction from council on what we would like to do for Canada Day. Obviously, it can't look like it was normally going to look, and normally does look, and even be enhanced this year with the lumberjacks. So I think it's just a matter of getting some guidance and direction from council on what kind of options do we want maybe the Lions to look into for Canada Day this year. And so that was kind of it for the budget changes in a nutshell. And just to summarize, like, these changes are recommended on the assumption that we don't change the property tax due date. I've been speaking with most local municipalities, and besides for a couple of them, most of them are keeping the July 2nd due date. And it sounds like that most of them are as well are keeping the same penalty date, and just letting the province has already dictated the penalty date for commercial and business classes as October 1st. So they're sticking with that, obviously, for the majority of them. And, but, you know, cash flow is basically the biggest concern for all of our local municipalities. So it's kind of essential because the due dates we have for our third-party remitters aren't changing. So it's kind of essential for the district to hopefully keep the due date at July 2nd. There's many programs out there providing property taxes, a deferment program, which people can look into, and we'll be promoting on our inserts this year. And then as well, just the province and the federal governments have provided many different other resources to people that could be suffering from this, from BC Hydro credits and others. Most of them are indicated on our websites there that people can access to try and receive some funding if they're financially struggling right now. And I guess I'll just kind of leave it there for now. And I'll kind of just open up to questions if you guys have anything you wanted to discuss. So basically, if we kind of adopted, if council recommended all of the changes described above, and that's not including the Lions Day, then we basically would be able to eliminate the 4% property tax increase. And if any changes were made to the Lions Day funding, then that obviously would increase that or provide different options to council of which items to reduce and which items to leave as is.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Ms. Gray, for your work on this, and all of staff for just coming up with some options here for us to consider. I'll just start this off and then I'll go through our speaking order alphabetically, and we can go through it twice because according to procedural bylaw, everyone will have 2 opportunities to speak on any agenda item. So I'm comfortable with what you have presented here. You know, I still am concerned about our residents and their ability to pay, but that's an unknown question. There are the options available for families and for folks that are 55 plus to qualify in the deferment program, and there still is ongoing advocacy to have that expanded to more. But in terms of moving dates and the like, it seems that those are pretty much fixed now. And the one item that the province is working on is the ability to have or hold public hearings during the pandemic. So but there is still an ongoing push. There's also a lot of advocacy effort happening across the country to the federal government for municipalities to receive funding. So this is where, should that advocacy effort pay off and be successful, we still won't know for some time, but at least it'll give us then some direction on what we could do to the rest of the budget and also budget 2021. So it's a bit early to kind of crystal ball that and to see. So we really just need to look at what's in front of us. But in terms of, you know, and in terms of the line items, because this is sort of fresh for all of council, I just felt it's important that we understand what's coming in, because at the end of the day, we're the ones that will be answering to these queries that come, not so much the groups, but to us instead. It'll be the question of like who's receiving this money and where's the funding going. So it was just helpful to have this information here. And also I think it goes back to our pre-COVID conversation that really some of these that don't have service agreements, we need to start transitioning them to that. And I think that'll just make it more clear and consistent across the board going forward. But the big one that just remains for me is Canada Day. So we are hearing that the no large gatherings has been said now, that will remain in place throughout the summer. It was said, you know, don't plan the reunions, the gatherings, the weddings, and all those things. So just having heard that, it was maybe Wednesday, I can't remember what day it was last week, but that was the direction that the province set out. I do not feel that we can proceed with Canada Day this year. And I think that it would be great, though, that there would be some funds left for a community celebration event when that would happen. So I think for, you know, everyone can speak to it, but I think the celebratory thing for me will not so much, you know, let's say we're all out in September and we could all have a big community event. The celebration will be seeing other people. It's not so much the lineup of the entertainment that would draw me out or others. It would be the ability just to connect and be with other people. So in terms of, you know, and I spoke very briefly with our CAO, like, what do we do here? Because what if it's November and it's pouring rain? Like, is that the time to have an outside party when it's so miserable? So in some ways, a thought was that we'd take it out of the budget completely, and then when the time comes that it looks like restrictions would be lifted, then we could look at council contingency or CAO contingency, and we could find some money and work with the Lions Club to put on something. They shouldn't have to be burdened with this, but with the full expense, I'm totally comfortable with the district funding something, but without knowing what that day is. So it's something to think about. We could reduce it or leave it or eliminate it. And if we eliminated it, what I'm trying to say is that I feel that we will be able to find the funds later on through other avenues in terms of what the budget looks like. But if council wants to leave something in there, that's also fine as well. It's just difficult to think about what money to leave there when we don't even know when we can have an event. So that's a long way of me trying to say, how do you plan a party when you don't know when you can have it? Like, it may not even occur this year. And then the other just comment was fireworks. They're usually done at the flats because that's where the celebration is. But our challenge with our topography here is there's no real vantage point to light them off from, and we can't have a crowd gather. So, and even when they're at the flats, like there's a few parts in Sun River where you can see them, but they're not really visible to all of Soup. Like if we were in the prairies and there was a valley, you could find a place, but we're not. Like it's difficult to figure out. So in this case, if the party isn't happening, I don't think the fireworks should either, because then it's only going, if they were lit off at the flats, it would be only limited to the few people that live in that area and no one else could see them. And if we said they were happening, then we would draw the crowd there, which we're not supposed to do. So those are just my comments on this here. Thank you very much, staff, for your work. And then I'll go through council and we'll just, you know, ask whatever questions you like or ideas, and let's look at getting them answered here. So Councillor Bateman, you're up.
Okay, so my head is full of Canada Day and fireworks thoughts at the moment. Canada Day, I think on the Lions website, they have now officially canceled Canada Day. So, and yes, I think they would like to see whether the loggers can come later in the year. So this is a great report. Thank you to staff. You've cut every which way. What I'm really pleased to see is that many of these expenses are not actual deferrals that we'll have to pay in future, but they are 2020 costs that simply won't be spent. And that's the travel budget. It seems like the fire department reductions, the foregoing of the summer students at legislative services, professional development training, the new hires till maybe the fall, and the community grants program, of course. So it's a good thing that we can cut back here. And to put it in perspective, I think we're looking at what was about an $80 increase on the average assessed value in Souk. And now we're slicing that back to whatever we reach. I think this is a really big elephant we've got here. I'm wondering whether, in terms of how we move through this, whether we should look at each item individually and make the appropriate decisions, and then separately discuss the service agreements, because those interest me. I think some are absolutely untouchable, others more questions are required. I have a question for staff, and that relates to the Souk Historical Society, which I believe also has a community service agreement, but I don't see them listed here.
Through your worship, they're known as many different names. I found 3 different ones. It's the Visitor Information Center.
Okay.
Is considered the Historical Society. I asked the same question.
All right. So yeah, I guess I'm just very interested in seeing how we digest this particular report and how we move forward with it. Thank you.
So, just, okay, sorry.
I can't hear anybody.
Sorry, that was me muting and unmuting myself many times.
No.
So just to go through this, what I thought, because it is how do we approach this, is if a councillor wants to raise something for discussion, then I think we can discuss it individually. But otherwise, like, you know, if like I'm, for example, is comfortable with all of this, and then I think we'll go councillor by councillor, and if there's some items that you want to have more discussion on or add something, let's take that one out. But otherwise, let's sort of treat it as a block of items, and then if we need to get into something individually, we can. Staff put a lot of time in this, because if you move one thing, it touches something else, and then that's why I'm just sort of going with sort of the recommendations of staff here, because you know, I could take a hatchet to this, but not realize the repercussions or the rebound effect it'll have through the department. So that's why it's sort of done this way. A couple of things, for the summer students, I did talk to our MP, and yes, they are fully funding the whole summer student program. He also asked if we would maybe want to take on an additional student, because some places in Souk that were planning on hiring a student now cannot. So there may be a possibility of us receiving another fully funded position. So again, that's just sort of news. It may or may not happen, but it's something for us to contemplate should that occur. And all the wages are fully funded now. So that way there's no impact either way. I did speak with Steve Wright with the Souk Lions, and he has reached out to the Lumberjack. They call themselves the Lumberjacks. I'm sorry, Councillor Lajeunesse, the Logger Show, but they call themselves the Lumberjack Show. They are comfortable just having the event next summer with us, so that'll be exciting. So rather than trying to find an appropriate fit for later this year, if it's in soggy November, that's just not going to be fun, and it may not be safe for the performer. So in which case, it would just be better to leave it until next year. So if there was anything, I'll go back to you, Councillor Bayman. Is there anything that you would want to extract out for an individual debate on the staff recommendations?
Well, I get everything looks fine. The one intangible is the new hires. How long will you delay that? 5 months, you're saving what, $90,000. 4 months, you're saving 76. So on such and such, yeah.
My
So
only
that's one.
comment there is that I would suggest we would need a way to see, we would need to get this out. We'll need to see how our residents, part of it, if our residents struggle to pay the property taxes, we're going to need to have a whole other conversation. So if building permit revenue drops off, and while there's programs in place for commercial property tax owners, but for those that don't qualify for the provincial deferment, we're going to need to reevaluate. I just can't justify hiring anyone now without knowing that information. I think this is going to be something we're going to need to reassess again come July when when we have a better sense of what our collection looks like. But meanwhile, as Ms. Gray said, our bill to the Capital Regional District is due. The RCMP bill is due. CRD Water Services, they're all due. We will need to pay all those bills. RCMP requisitions and the like all need to be paid. So I think it's just a bit early to determine when we might add. And also, our CAO and hiring staff can't do in-person interviews right now. And I think for some of these key positions, that'll be, you can do great stuff on Skype, but you are going to hit a point where you're going to need to do in person. And then in some cases, if someone were to relocate, it's just unfortunate timing right now. This is a bit early while we're thinking about reopening, but and if if there's a lot of physical distancing that needs to occur in the workplace, how do we bring some other additional people in? So there's so many unknowns right now. Mr. McInnes, do you have anything else to add?
Well, I can just provide a little bit of math, and I'm going to request that Rachel correct me if I'm wrong, but if we do everything, including the $30,000 for Canada Day, but leave everything else in the line item budget as is, it equates to about $390,000. In order for us to get rid of the 4% tax increase, we need about $320,000. So the 390 is deferring those two positions for 2 months, which I think is reasonable given all of the circumstances. So we do have some room to move. I think we can comfortably get our budget to zero and possibly below. So that's sort of how does that sound right to you, Rachel?
Yes, yeah, that's close. Pretty accurate, yes. And basically, it would just depend on, as the mayor stated earlier, there's a lot of moving pieces, so it depends what you do with capital and stuff, just how it would move around. But definitely, if council went with the majority of everything being recommended here, and including Canada Day, there should be sufficient funds to have a 0% property tax increase for sure. And just trying to save a little bit of wiggle room, just not knowing how much funding will be coming in and the timing of the funding. So it'll be nice to potentially reduce some expenses later on in the year if it looks like some of that funding isn't going to materialize, and just kind of reduce some of those budget items. So historically, the budgets are very tight around here. So just kind of keeping that in mind, that there's not a lot of wiggle room. So it'd be nice if we can have a little bit of buffer to play with if later on in the year it looks like we might have to delay some hiring or something because we don't have enough revenue coming in and the timing of it all.
I do want to state as well that the 390 that I alluded to does include replacing the $120,000 in capital with money from other projects that we would have to take from reserve or some other funding source.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So I'll go to Councillor Beddoes, please. You need to unmute though, please.
Oh, I thought I was unmuted. There we go. How's that? I was ready and I unmuted. I must have muted again. I'm doing a trick like you do. First of all, I do appreciate what staff has done. They've gone back and made some pretty heavy cuts here and some thinking. And I think it really sends a wonderful message to the community if we get the taxes down to zero. I think other jurisdictions have done that, and that would be, I think it'd be good for the residents. I know it's only about $80, but you know, at these times it's symbolic, and I like what they've done. For all the items on page 17, which are before we get to the community grant things, I'm in favor of all of them. Very, very nicely done. Defer the hirings as long as it makes sense. Leave that up to staff to pick the date when that's happened. I can't say I'm very happy with the those line items. I think Councillor Bateman alluded to it too. You know, we have service agreements, and I understand they're basically untouchable. Is that correct? Before I go on, the service agreements, like the CHI, Community Association, Regional Tourism, and Visitor Information, those are service agreements that were tied into 2022, is correct? Okay,
Yes.
You're nodding, okay. Well, it annoys me because even though, I mean, maybe we're stuck, but you know, the Visitors Information Center is closed, isn't it? The museum's closed. So, I mean, I'm not sure what they're doing, and you know, I don't like to lay off staff as well, but there is a government program that, you know, helps out that. So I would like some of these organizations, I'll get on to some of these others, but I would like to discuss these other ones because it just sort of annoys me. And the same with the theater seats. I understand that they want to go ahead with 25,000. You know, that annoys me too. Food bank, can't do too much about that. In fact, they probably even need more. But these other ones, the Philharmonic, you know, they didn't even offer anything up. The Sioux Community Arts Council, they didn't offer anything up. Sioux Wildwise, nothing up there too. You know, in these hard times, I would expect someone to say, okay, well, we only need 6,000 this year instead of 7,000, you know, just to make it realistically. Art bus program, I don't know if the kids are going to be back in September, probably, but you know, there again, there's half a year down the tube. And you know, Christmas Bureau, don't touch that. Fireworks, we're going to probably recover. And I did hear that Canada Day was, but Sioux Fine Arts, do they need all $7,000 when they're not putting on a show, but putting on a virtual show? I'm a little disappointed in those groups didn't come back with some sort of savings to help us out that are trying to help the residents of Sioux. So that being said, I don't know how to proceed with that, how the other councillors feel about those amounts, or, you know, we killed that other program completely. And then these people, because they're a line item, I don't know, I just find it in these hard times when we're trying to find savings and the staff's doing such a marvelous job, these people could have chipped in as well. And it just frustrates me. But other than that, the other things I think are very good. And I'll wait to hear about, I don't know what ones to pick off. I'd like to pick them all off for discussion, but I would like to hear from the other councillors before I go into too much of a rant.
Well
So I'm
said.
done.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beddoes. Over to Councillor Lajeunesse, please.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add at this point. I'm happy with the recommendations as they are.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Lajeunesse. Councillor Logans, please.
Hello. I agree with the recommendations as they are as well. The line items, I mean, I totally agree with Councillor Betters that there is some frustration there. However, those are contracts that we have with them. So I don't know how we can look at that, and is there a way that we can extend them and cancel this year out if there's some organizations that don't need the funding or whatnot. But if they do have to stay the way they are, then that's how it goes, and I'm okay with that as well. I know some organizations like the museum, for instance, while it's physically closed, they are doing online programming and events, and that's all on their Facebook page, so that's nice. They had an online art show recently, and they did like a quiz night, a live quiz night as well. So they are still trying to stay open for the public. That's all I have to add, and I would support moving the recommendations.
Okay, Councillor McMath, please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. I have a couple questions. Of all those contracts, how many are not in good standing right now?
Through your worship, just to clarify, you mean the service agreement items?
Yes, because I mean, with what Councillor Bettles was saying, like the expectation would have been nice if they had put their hand up and chipped in and put a little in the pot. But theoretically, if they're voiding their contract, could we not just pull what we wanted to?
Through your worship, so the Souk Region Chi submits the reports required, and then the others I would have to confirm, but the last time they've submitted the report, in theory there was supposed to be a more fulsome report coming later this year with more details on this once I can do some more research. So just in the interest of time, this is kind of what I was able to find so far. So the Souk Chi is submitting their reports, and I have been speaking with the Souk Community Association, who just had a change in directors there. So I know they are getting on board with submitting the required reports that
so as
need
of
to
right
happen
now,
there.
Fuchi's the only one in good standing?
Correct.
Okay, so maybe Councillor Bettles wants to look at those numbers further. There's another question here. Oh, from the reduction from the fire department, where's Chief? Hi, Chief. How much came, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, how much came from the volunteer appreciation fund? Although I know that's not what it's called.
Yeah, so approximately reduction from the actual banquet fund is pretty much a whole line item minus about $1,000 that was put on the deposit for holding the facility there. So we've bumped that deposit to the new year. The intentions to looking at, we just have appreciation dinner probably in, the winter, springtime, anywhere from February to May. Okay. So that total amount is, looking at my sheet here, is about $12,000.
Awesome. And then the inserts that are going out, the ones that we put out previously, they're pretty word heavy and hard to digest. So I just wanted to know, I'd like to have just a preview of the draft before it goes out, just so we can look at edits. I know it's kind of like an awkward time, can't really sit down and get together, but just hoping that we can have a preview of it before it goes out.
Yes, so further to that, I remember that coming up as an item. So I think it's pretty much tomorrow. So staff will be drafting that, and they are listening to us closely for messaging. They'll be drafting that and sending a draft out to council tomorrow, and then it has to go to Queen's Printer to hit the timeline to come back to us. So just monitor your inboxes for that messaging to come. And since we don't have a group photo, it'll be the use of the individual headshots. Or headshots. Well, that's what they are. Portrait
shots.
shots for the.
Right. We could also not put those in there too. That would be cool. When is that? When is the deadline for the submission?
Ms. Gree.
Sorry. Through your worship, the deadline to have it into Queen's Printer, the inserts, is Friday.
Okay.
So the plan
Friday,
would be to,
right?
yes, so to finalize them this week. We were kind of waiting for today's council meeting just to kind of confirm what council just make sure that we were messaging it the same way that council would hopefully agree with. So the plan would be to finalize the insert hopefully tomorrow, and then send around a draft for any input or changes. And they're going to look different than they did in prior years, because we're definitely going to focus on COVID and, you know, and providing options and where you can go to for help and information as well. The whole deferment program changed this year, so we're really going to try and promote that and just let people know that the province is promoting that. And yeah, so there'll be 4 pages in total that we can have in an insert, 2 double-sided pages. And so Friday is the deadline to get them into Queen's Printer.
Okay.
Anything else, Councillor McMath?
No, that's everything. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor St-Pierre.
Can you hear me? Perfect. So I had a couple of comments and questions. I've got a lot written down here. The first one, I go back to the line items, and I had similar concerns to Councillor Beddoes in terms of specifically the virtual art show. I'm wondering how similar this is to what's happening with the BC Farmers Market Association, where they've actually created an online portal for people, for basically growers to distribute. So is this going to become an online portal for local souk artists to distribute their work? And I'm just curious, because we don't actually have a presentation. I do appreciate the letter, and I appreciate that their funding is basically stacked, that, you know, if they don't get funding at this rate, they don't get it for other things, and it will have a huge impact on them. I also appreciate that it's a contract and that this is not necessarily the time to change things. But I am curious about, without a presentation, a more thorough presentation, I don't know what's happening with that money, or what exactly it would cost to do what they need to have done. So that's just a comment. I'm curious, in terms of 390,000, how much of that is actually this year, and how much will be deferred to next year? Because I'm well aware that right now, one of the major issues financially for our residents is that many of them are going to be going into debt with credit cards and lines of credit and whatnot. And then next year, this year and next year, they're going to be paying this stuff back once they're back at work. So the financial pinch is going to keep on going. And if we go from whatever we make it to in terms of a tax increase or no tax increase this year, but then end up with a necessary 5 or 6% next year, that is going to suck. So I'd like to be sure that we're not actually creating a situation where we're going to put more stress and more hurt on our residents next year. And so I'd be curious to get an answer from staff on that, because it wasn't clear to me how much of the 390 was just gone and not to come back to haunt us next year. And so I'd like to get that answered before continuing, if possible.
Through your worship. So as far as the funding that will carry forward to next, or well, basically it's just deferring it in 2020 and carry the expenses forward to 2021. Those items would include the $50,000 for the OCP budget. It's just reducing the budget to more of a realistic expenditure, but that's not reducing the budget overall. It's just going to move it forward a year. The $25,000 in property maintenance is another item that in theory should be just move forward to a future year, because that will, we got a cost estimate for all these repairs that need to be done. So it's just a matter of strategically picking which projects to complete. But eventually in the next, you know, I believe it's a 10-year recommendations. There's quite a lot of projects, over $1 million, I believe, worth of recommendations of improvements and upgrades to the building that would be required. The capital projects, I don't know for sure yet, but basically, because I just need to look closer at the reserve funds, but if these projects will still be occurring, so while it may be semantics that it wouldn't, the property tax increase in a future year wouldn't fund these specific projects, it will probably most likely be needed to fund a different project in the out years. So once I can rejig the numbers a bit, I can provide a bit more clarity on which projects used to be funded with reserves and now might be funded by property taxes in a future year. And then I believe that was it. The remaining reductions are just current year reductions that won't result in an increased expense in the future year. So I believe.
Do we have a total?
So that's what I was just looking at. It would be 195,000. out of the 320,000.
Okay. So I have a further question. There's some expectation, I believe, that we might be able to get some money for infrastructure spending from other levels of government, in terms of recovery from COVID. Is there likely to be the chance that we can use some of that to offset some of these potentially deferred costs? Or has staff already looked at that? And is there an answer to that?
It's hard to tell right now, Councillor St-Pierre, because we haven't received the federal response. So the province has not yet come forward with any money for municipalities. They provided their framework to deal with legislation, the relief for small businesses using our school taxes and the likes, but there hasn't been any funding that has come from the province. And then the federal advocacy is really on right now. So even this morning, I was on a teleconference call with the Rural Forum of FCM and also had Minister Monsef on the line. And last Thursday, I believe, the FCM released its advocacy package, and that has been in the works for several weeks now. So all of that has now been presented to the federal government. I've also signed a letter to go to every MP on behalf of the UBCM in full support of the federal position. So if you read the Globe and Mail, you may have seen some reference to that advocacy work that I've been a part of. So that's all happening now. And so there is also the case of the other ask is flexibility. So while some municipalities are in a cash flow and need cash flow right now, that isn't the case for us. We're finding another way to navigate this. So it would be the case so that would be great stimulus money for infrastructure. We don't know that answer yet. So that's why I think that it's a little too early to tell. We know what our ask is, but we don't know what we're going to receive. So when we receive that, that'll be the time where we would need to then look at, okay, what can we now sort of really green light, and what other potential things could we move forward in advance this year in an ideal world? Or what then should we need to gear up, and how do we need to change our budget going forward? So in my mind, this entire financial plan will need to shift, because all of the planning that went into this went in a pre-COVID time. And then now, once we see what cash flow looks like and how this all impacts us, what the response is from the feds, then we can see. There may not be anything. Transit is really going to struggle a lot. And transit is an essential service, and they're trying to run, and they can't collect fares. And so there's a big piece there. So we just don't know, but I think that we will need to have another budget workshop sort of, like August, September, October, once we actually have a better sense of where we are, and also what response is coming back from the feds. It's too early to tell.
Okay. So two final questions. Comments. One is the website. Given that we're trying to keep people with this safe physical distancing, and that our website has needed revamping, and that it's a good way of actually communicating with the public, I would suggest that that's a piece that we probably should keep in, simply because it's a good response to the pandemic. It's something that needs to be done. It doesn't actually, it's all benefit as far as I'm concerned. It needs to be done. The other one was simply a question around the repairs, and whether or not we'll be looking at additional costs because of additional damage done if repairs are not done. So some repairs, I know you can wait. Other repairs, if you don't do them now, like you fix your roof right away. So I'm assuming that this is the types of repairs that we're putting off are not those types, and I'd like a confirmation of that. That's all. Other than that, it's great stuff. Thank you very much.
So if I could, Your Worship, the projects that are in the building assessment report, they could be put off a year. The biggest factor in the costing is inflation, and who knows what's going to happen with inflation over the next 6 months. No, I think we've all seen the report. We've got the sprinkler system in this building is subpar, and the roof that's over top of the fire hall, it's a big ticket item. It's over $200,000. but to wait another year, I think it's the assessment was not bad. It's not leaking anymore. It was the results of the assessment, but it does need to be replaced.
Do we have the option of putting off the safe for documents?
So I didn't hear that.
Do we have the option of delaying the installation of the safe for documents, the fireproof or the warehouse, the local warehouse within the district buildings for documents, which I believe was around 70,000 or something like that?
It's 58,000. And Rachel, where are you at with that?
Through your worship, yes, definitely that's an option as well for a capital project that could just get deferred to another year. Like it's for most of the capital project, the works as you're pointing out there, Councillor St-Pierre, most of this work will need to be done. It's just a matter of it won't get done in 2020, so we will just defer it to a future year, and then depending on the funding left in the reserve funds, et cetera, just kind of strategize which year to fund those projects in, the ones that can get deferred. But definitely the vault is one, you know, it's not a need to have, it's a nice to have, I guess, for 2020. And it's something we could just defer to a future year if necessary, just to leave it as some additional funds in our reserve fund for 2020.
I'd like to see that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So we've gone sort of through the first round here, and I'm hearing mostly that councillors are comfortable with the changes here. With I'm not going to go to the line items. I'm just going to talk about the sort of the first part of the report here. So the intent would be to leave the revenue projections as it is, and then the expense budget is here, and then there has been some discussion here about progressing with the website this year and leaving the vault until 2021. So that, should council wish to entertain those, this is where, when we go through this now for a second time, is then let's sort of get into that. And I totally appreciate everyone's comfort level with the line items. Just to answer, I did have an in-depth conversation with the Souk Fine Arts Show. So their intent is to run the same show, but in an online fashion. So it's not just a website, but they're going to do the whole purchaser's preview as it normally was, and to do as much of the showcasing and all. And so basically it'll be a full virtual show with as many pieces that they can put into an online type of session. So first of its kind for this, but obviously necessary. So I think, and because the other funding is contingent on the district contributing the 7,000. So this is where, if we moved it, their other funding would disappear. And I think the Souk Community Arts Council is similar. They receive matching funds from the province because of what the district contributes. And then they recently did their artifact show. It's usually at the museum. They did it online this year and have that going out as well. And then some of the other pieces, you know, I think a challenge one is Strata, because right now is a time where we just can't welcome visitors, but they may have already made some connections and made commitments to the funding with the understanding that they're in a service agreement. So that's where you know, while the reporting has been subpar, we're on it. I didn't realize that this was the situation, as we had agreed on with all the groups that they are to submit their plans for the upcoming year, their reports from the past year. And I almost fell out of my chair when I found out that only one group has been doing that. And that is why we have started this conversation to get the accountability in place, because I was not aware that that decision or directive had gone out. So it was kind of a shock to me, and that's why we're fixing it now. So we'll go through this for our next round, and then I think we'll get to a point where we'll look at motion. So if there is a motion that you would like to make, maybe we'll just hear the discussion, and then I'll return to you for an actual motion, unless it's just the recommendation. But if you're looking to change or make any differences, now would be the time to make those recommendations. And the only one for myself, I think, is I know that Canada Day is not happening, and so all of the funding for that, and unfortunately the fireworks, should come out. And then, like I said, once we have a better sense of when we can have a community gathering, we'll find the necessary funding in other avenues through the district. But I'll leave it at that and go to Councillor Bateman.
All right. I would agree with Councillor St-Pierre that the website refresh is important. It just should not be deferred. It should be deferred until we have our communications coordinator in place, of course. And in addressing the community service agreements, I find that really interesting because I did go back, committee of the whole of, what is this date here? Early November 2017, this is when all the 5-year agreements were renewed, and each community service agreement does have very clear guidelines. Prepare and deliver to the district no later than March 31st annually. A complete operations report for each of the groups, and a year-end financial statement, etc. So I really look forward to a day in the future when we will see the latest year, the 2019 reports and their financial statements, and we can properly look at this, these community service agreements. I'm not clear on what reporting requirements are required of the line item fundees. However, the service agreements are big time, and given that the chamber wants back in to the pie here, we have to look seriously at that. So that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman, and thank you for your reference there as well. Councillor Beddoes, please.
Yeah, I think you alluded to the fact that we sort of do it in 2 stages. The first stage, with all those adjustments, I'm 100% happy with. You know, if you want to defer the vault, I don't have a problem with that either. I don't think it's going to be a big item either way. So I'm pretty happy with that. The service agreements, I think we're stuck at the moment because we have this funding agreement, although if they haven't put the reports in, then to me it's null and void. But we're not going to go chop out that sort of money to these people now. It cripple them. But I would be hoping in the next 6 months that we ask each of them, they were due in March, that they have to September 1st to come before us with some details on what they're doing here, because I'm still not very happy with them, and I think that we have to hold their foot to the fire. And you know, we don't have to do anything with it at the moment, but we should carry through and get some explanations, especially with Strata. I have no idea where that's going, and we want the you know, we may want the chamber involved in that as well. Yeah, it's annoying. Now the other ones, yeah, it frustrates me too. I almost wanted to say, except for those like the food bank items, the Christmas Bureau, we'll knock them all back 10%. You know, it's like $700 on a 7,000, but it does send a message that we're not, or not. I mean, maybe it's one that I have to let go for the time being. It's not a tremendous amount of money when you take those service agreements out, especially when you take the Christmas Bureau. We're going to leave what it is. But these other ones, I think we better send notice to them too that we're going to be having a hard look at any future amounts for next year. So I guess with that being said, I'm happy with the whole thing. I can't hear you.
There we go. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Thank you, Councillor Beddoes. The whole screen just sort of moves again. Councillor Lajeunesse, please.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would agree with Councillor St-Pierre that the vault could go definitely for this year. Other than that, no further comments.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Logans?
Kind of the same stance as before. I agree with the recommendations. I also agree with you, Mayor Tait, around removing the funding for Canada Day and the fireworks. It does not mean that we don't ever want to celebrate these things. It just means we'll remove it for now and get the money back later when we actually can put a solid plan together. And as for the line items, I think it would be great if we could wait for a report from Ms. Gray as she was working on them. I know things changed. Hopefully we can get to that soon, but I don't think that it's really the right time. We're not educated enough as to what's actually happening with each of these to make some decisions on them. So I would leave them for now, but I do echo the same sentiments as the other councillors on those items. And that is all.
Thank you very much. Councillor McMath.
It's not like a broken record. I echo councillors as well. I'm happy to scratch the vault. I'm also happy to scratch the seats or defer. I have one question. With the status of the district or SUC offices right now, would that building pass a fire inspection?
That question would be addressed to the fire chief. I would say that there's certain elements that we know have issues in the actual building, but it does go through a regular inspection routine, and we have it in our records there, and we would remedy anything that's life concerning right away there. But the main thing that we have concern about that the building assessment is looked at is just the state of the sprinkler system.
When was the last time that it was inspected, or do you just do it piecemeal?
It's just like the same trigger system of any other type of building there. So we'd have to look at the last records when their fire inspector went in there. But you know, it's on a recurring schedule as per our bylaw.
So last inspection, it passed.
Yeah, there'd probably be some items in there. I'd have to pull the record and show it to you, like
Okay.
what was acknowledged on there. But there was nothing, from what I recall, outstanding that we weren't aware of.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Councillor St-Pierre.
Councillor St-Pierre, go ahead.
Yes, very much appreciate comments from Councillor Beddoes and Councillor Loggins. I do think that we should be getting a report from Ms. Gray, and I do think we should have some sort of a date where we can actually expect some information back from our various service contract people. I would like, of course, to see the website done and potentially the vault removed. And I think that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone for your participation in this process. So what I'm hearing and sort of what I saw was that sensing the website to remain in, but for that work to really commence when a communications person has arrived. So they are kind of connected together. So, and that sort of generated a bit of, that sort of concept generated support from our CAO. And then hearing from majority of councillors that the vault to be deferred to a future year. So it is mostly through capital, but it does keep funds in our reserve. Should we unfortunately need to borrow against our capital reserves, that has been a direction that has been received from the province. It's not something that we anticipate needing to do, but it does provide that possibility should we need it just to cover off operating expenses. Because like I said, a lot of this, I think we have to wait to see what revenue comes in to our municipality in July. Obviously, anyone that defers their taxes is not a problem. Anyone that pays with their mortgage, perhaps, it's the same thing. And so it's just a bit of a guess for the rest. But that's just part of our cash flow challenge right now. And then we all would like more information on the service agreements. And so sort of the direction here is to have our staff continue to follow up on this. And then also what I would like to know there is, in some cases, they're planning for events that may occur later, but if those events don't happen, then we don't pay, then we wouldn't need to pay out the funds, right? Because otherwise, where would they go? Like if there's no show, then there's no need for the fund. So then technically we shouldn't have to pay out those funds. So a bit more information to come there. So I'm going to, let's see here, is we're going to do this in part. So firstly, let's receive the report for information, and then I'm going to suggest a motion for council to consider. So let's start off with the easy one, that council receive this for information, moved by Councillor St-Pierre and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Thank you. Any questions on receiving the report? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. And then for the second part then would be something that council directs staff to leave the capital funds for a website in the budget, but to defer the vault to 2021. Because we know it has to happen, just not this year. So moved by Councillor St-Pierre and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Okay, discussion on that motion. I'll go to Mr. McInnes. Is that clear for you?
No, it's not. There's some nuances in the math. So what would be clear to me would be something like direct administration to come back with a 0% increase to the 2020 budget. Because we're more than zero right now. So it would just check my math again, and actually I missed the $50,000 from the revenue side, so we're well over $400,000 right now. We're looking for 320-ish to take away the 4%. If we stay with the status quo, we're going to be under 0%.
But is that a bad thing?
No, I just, if the idea though is to come in with a 0% increase, then give us that direction. If you want to continue with more than 0%, then obviously that's council's prerogative.
Okay, so Councillor Beddoes, I see you have a pen up.
Oh, wrong one. Oh, there it is. I really like that idea. I think a 0% would send the right message. I think a -2, it doesn't do us any good. It gives us a little bit of cash in there if something comes up later in the year. I would like our CAO's recommendation that we just say for a 0% increase. And if we've got $80,000 stuffed away somewhere, who knows when we're going to need that or what comes up. It's a trying time. So I'm very happy with that recommendation. I'd like to go with it. But we've got a motion on the floor, so we have to deal with the other motion.
Okay, so Ms. Machada, I'm going to go to our corporate officer, just given what I had thrown out there, and then that was moved and seconded, and then just a recommendation from staff. How would you recommend that we proceed here? I can't hear you.
Sorry, you could ask the mover to just withdraw the motion and then ask somebody to make the new motion as proposed, which was for the 0% increase.
Okay, so Councillor St-Pierre had moved what I had thrown out there. Are you comfortable taking that, rescinding it, withdrawing it?
I'm comfortable with rescinding the motion. I would suggest that staff will, of course, be moving towards adjusting for deferment so that we have as little, few problems in the future as possible in terms of where the money's coming from, in terms of how the budget is adjusted. But I trust them on that. Just would like to make that clear.
Okay. So that, and Councillor Beddoes, you had seconded that. Are you comfortable with it being withdrawn and going with?
Yeah, I would prefer to go with the CAO's recommendation and have that 0%.
Okay.
I withdraw.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. McInnes, can you just read out that, and then I'll have Mr. McInnes read it out, and then I'll look for a mover and a seconder.
Sure. So it would be that council direct administration to come to the May 11th council meeting with a 2020 budget of 0% increase over 2019.
So moved.
But you meant 2020.
2020. So the 2020 budget will be 0% over 19.
Okay, over 19. Sorry.
I'll second that.
So that's moved by Councillor McMath.
No, Bateman movement.
Councillor Bateman moved it, okay, and Councillor McMath is seconding it.
Sure, give it to her.
Okay, at this point, rather than going through the order, if you just want to put your hand up if you want to speak to this motion. Councillor Logans?
I'm just a bit confused about it. It does make sense that we're doing a 0% increase, but now I'm wondering like what part of our conversation is going to be reflected in that and what will not be.
So I can respond to that, Your Worship, if you wish. So I agree with Councillor St-Pierre that the effort will be to mitigate any increases in the 2021 budget. So that will be the priority when we try and find things that move. So right now in our 5-year financial plan, the tax increase for 2021 is 2.89%, if I recall correctly. And we will do our best to not move things into 2021 that will impact that 21 tax rate.
Thank you.
Does that work for you, Councillor Logans? That clarifies that? Okay. Other questions? If you want to just raise your hand so I can see you. Looking across the squares. No, okay. So I'll call the question then. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Okay, so that's carried unanimously. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And also, just for the second part, it's basically direction unless Mr. McInnes, you'd like something different, but clearly council would like more clarity on these other items. So it's more for Ms. Gray just to continue with her work on the various line items, and we look forward to some recommendations in the not too distant future.
Absolutely. So that is in the new policy 003, I think is the policy number, and it's spelled out in there what the requirements are and where the responsibilities within our organization lie.
Okay, so we'll stay tuned for that. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Gray and staff, for your work on this, and council as well, just for all your thoughtful consideration here. So on to our next item, which is 9.2. It's an update for development procedures during the COVID-19 pandemic. And Mr. Bylaw, will you be speaking to this and walking us through the report?
Thank you. So this report is a follow-up from the previous council meeting where staff quickly highlighted which bylaws and policies would be applicable for public input and public hearings specifically. So we're returning with this report with more detail regarding those specific bylaws that we had highlighted and possible suggestions that council may want to consider to allow for the continuation of public input, but to streamline the process a little bit more so that council can receive this information possibly through written submissions that would be included in a staff report to council. So then that way the public could still participate in the process but not need to be there as part of the council meeting. So they would still have input but not at the council meeting. So I'll just go through those items within the report and just highlight where we're looking at those necessary changes. So development procedures bylaw, there's no suggested changes required for that process. But what we're looking at the next one with the development application procedures policy, among staff related to the pre-application meeting process. So typically we would have somebody, a prospective applicant, come into the office, meet with them, and go through their proposal. We can certainly go through this process via a teleconference or video chat, or in some instances we've just provided an opportunity for them to submit their proposal via email, and then we get back to them with a detailed written letter. So we can work with that based on what is an option for the applicant to get that information, but there would be no required amendments to section 1.1 of that policy. Going through that policy in more detail, the OCP bylaw amendments, what we're suggesting is a possible alternative that at staff's discretion, we could discuss with the applicant an alternative public information gathering option that would abide by the social isolation guidelines. And that would still allow the public to provide that input as opposed to likely a traditional open house type format where people would be coming in publicly. So that would require an amendment to section 2.8. And from that point moving forward, once you get to section 2.14 of the procedure, that's where the public hearing process would come in. So we could work on that application up until the point where a public hearing would need to be required. That being said, if there's any changes from the province that outline how possibly electronic public hearing could be conducted, we could then look into further and discuss with the applicant how the expectation would be for that to follow through. Similarly, with the zoning bylaw amendments, it's the same process. So in section 3.9 of the policy, again, there's that public information gathering session requirement. So we would be looking possibly for the same format where we could accept other forms of public input as part of that process. And again, at section 3.17 of the procedures would cease at that point regarding the public hearing. The only other instance where we possibly could continue on in that process is if there was an option to waive the requirement for a public hearing if it was in fact that the zoning bylaw amendment complied with the OCP. So there is that option available through the Local Government Act. In terms of development permits, you'll see there's a list of options that the approving officer can go through the process and approve for development permits, as well as those types of permits where council would be the approving authority on that. What we're suggesting at this point is direction from council to have the opportunity to explore further those delegated authorities to include development permits and minor variance applications, just to provide for greater efficiency if those options are available. And what the expectation would be is we would look at comparable municipalities and see what types of minor variance applications they would consider and bring that back for council's consideration as well to see if that would be something that council would like to consider. So that is one option to expand those delegated authorities for development permits. For development variance permits, there is an input session required with regular council meetings. However, through the Local Government Act, there's only the requirement to notify landowners of that permit proposal. So what we're suggesting is, as opposed to having the public input session at the regular council meeting, this would be for the opportunity with the notice going out to affected landowners that they could provide that written submission, and then that be included in council's report for consideration at the time they're considering that proposal. Next one is the Board of Variance permits. As we discussed at the previous meeting, we haven't had a meeting for that since 2015, so we see it appropriate to just deal with that on a case-by-case basis when necessary. Temporary use permits. Again, this is where a public hearing could be affected. So at the point that section 6.10 is reached, that's where we'd have to wait until we could address how the public hearing could move on. Agricultural Land Commission applications, public notice will continue to be provided to affected landowners with no further mandated requirement for public input. The communications and antenna policy. So with this one, we're looking to actually rescind the policy in future and then roll the requirements into policy 8.4. And then that way, at that time, we can analyze this further. So the main component that we want to focus on with this process specifically for the communications antenna is that the municipal process is essentially what the telecommunications provider is using to gather their public input when they're reporting back to the federal government on their application. So ultimately, it is the federal agency that makes that final approval, but they do seek public input as to how it may affect landowners or the municipality. And so using our application process is the telecommunications provider's way of gathering that input. So the two kind of work hand in hand, using a municipal process to get that information for the federal government. The next one is the waiving of the public hearing. So as I mentioned with the zoning bylaw amendments, if the proposal complies with the official community plan, there is that ability to waive the need for a public hearing. And so staff's suggestion is to deal with these applications on a case-by-case basis and bring the proposal forward to council for the consideration of waiving that hearing, and then also having the option to consider what alternative would be available to gather public input as part of that process. The development permit delegation bylaw, we've identified that there's no immediate impacts required for changes to that bylaw, other than just verbiage within there identifying the proper positions within the planning department. Lastly is the residential strata title conversion policy. And with this one, we have a separate report that's following later in the council agenda. And with that one, we're looking at having that authority redelegated back to the approving officer. When the policy was first set up, it was the approving officer who had the ability to approve these title conversions. And then in 2012, that was transferred over to council. And so that remains within the policy. And what we're suggesting is the ability to have it transferred back now to the approving officer. So these files wouldn't have to go to council, which at a minimum would be 2 council meetings. So with that, that concludes this report, and I will take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the report and for walking us through this. So go back to my list. I don't have anything to question or add. It's pretty straightforward here in terms of where we're at. So just going in sequence though, but to the next person, so that that would put Councillor Beddoes up first as I'm dropping through this list. So over to Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, I don't have a great deal of heartache. Thank you for that report. It was very, you looked at a lot of things in depth, and I appreciate that. Looks like we can carry on with business. The only thing I object to, and it's coming up next, is that well, we'll deal with it then, you know, delegating the authority. I'd like to comment on that. I don't need to do it at this time because we're going to be dealing with it. So other than that, that's it. I'm okay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Beddoes. Councillor Lajeunesse.
Nothing really to add. I think this is good as is. Well, I do appreciate Mrs. Luer's comments. These are unprecedented times we're living in, and we need to keep things moving along. So let's do that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Logans.
I do tend to agree with the recommendations, but I know if Brenda was here right now, she would not. So there are, part of me does want to make sure we do everything we can to keep public input as open as much as possible and beyond just online opportunities. So I do struggle with this a bit. However, I understand that it is a change that we need to make. So unless someone is completely opposed to it, I'll follow suit in favor.
Okay, Councillor McMath.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same way, especially the opportunity for us to do it on a case-by-case basis. Like at the very least, I would like us to just have some consistency across the board. And it always seems like at every meeting, like even with a group of us putting our heads together and staff, that there's a member of the public that comes back with something that none of us had thought of, and it actually can equate to dollars. So I would hate for us to lose out on that opportunity. So that's just the piece that I'm struggling with right now.
Councillor St-Pierre.
I agree with Councillor McMath on that one. I think that often the public has input that is really valuable on lots of levels. I do have a suggestion on that account, and I'm curious as to whether or not we can actually hold off final reading on these things. So for example, go ahead and do the input through electronics and so on and so forth, but when people actually see the broadcast, often they'll have a chance to see the presentation, the staff comments, the proponents' comments, and the entire information package. That's not generally available before that. There's a lot more information all of a sudden, and then people might have wished they'd been at the meeting or to make comments. At that point, if they can actually provide further input before we actually make our final determination, that would feel satisfying to me in terms of actually including the public and actually be an improvement on what we have right now in terms of really getting public input. So just a thought to put out there. I don't know that it would actually require any changes in terms of our bylaws. It's just a matter of doing final reading. But that's for our staff to determine whether that's possible or not. And I did have one more comment. Often the information that's put out in the newspapers and on signs and so on and so forth is fairly cryptic in terms of, referring to this zoning bylaw or so on and so forth. I think that if we actually do want public input, trying to simplify that language and make everything a little bit more plain speak would be useful. So just another comment on that one.
So I'll ask though on that for the signage and the notices, like it's pretty, like if we are pretty much mandate to stick with those legalese, are we not? Or I'm kind of looking at Ms. Machada right now, but I don't know if she can tell. But in terms of what the notices, like a lot of it is spelled out in the Local Government Act in terms of how it has to be written. Like I get it, they are cryptic because it's like, what is that? You have to sort of look into it further, but.
I think it's spelled out in terms of how it has to be in terms of the basic information, but it doesn't stop us from adding additional information in plain speak.
Yeah, I would say we can certainly look at that and see if there's simplified language that can be added to the signage. I know that they all are pre-printed as well, but we can maybe look at that. And if I can just add, I know Councillor St-Pierre just mentioned delaying bylaw readings. Chances are if it's a bylaw, it's a zoning issue, which means it's had a public hearing and council cannot receive new information after the close of the public hearing. So that would not work.
But at this time, there's no changes to public hearings.
No, as we're expecting some announcement from the province this week. So we'll take that into consideration as well.
Okay. Is hearing now from some of the councillors, I'll go back to staff. Mr. Bylaw, is there anything you would like to elaborate on or answer from? Oh, sorry, I missed Councillor Bateman. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Mr. Bylaw. Sorry.
That's fine. My head's hurting a bit here, and the plain speak piece is good. But after 18 months of trying to figure all this out, thank you for the really clear report. It's written in a very direct manner. It seems like processes continue up until the point of, in the policies, up until the point of the public hearing itself. And then we're being asked to be in a position to do a case-by-case basis. I don't have a problem with case-to-case basis, given that each applicant, public input can be obtained by written electronic submission, as stated here. I recall that we did receive a report from planning that identified perhaps a dozen projects that are on the go at the moment. So I don't know how many of those are coming towards a public hearing process. It's possible that they can stack up and we can tackle them all at once when things open up again. But better to, and I think Councillor St-Pierre's point about taking it through to a second or third reading, therefore stretches the opportunity out for people to get engaged.
Okay, back to Mr. Bylaw.
So with these recommendations that have been provided, these are certainly proposed amendments that we could look at and then bring forward to a future council meeting for council's consideration. But the main thing that we're always striving for is having some form of public input available, and certainly that's going to be with council's desire how that format will be, whether it's at the council meeting specifically or by written submission. But with all these recommendations, we're just ensuring that the minimum requirements are at least being met by the Local Government Act, and then above and beyond that, what's contained within our bylaws as well as our policies.
Okay. Is there any questions from anyone for second round? Councillor St-Pierre?
It's not a question, it's actually a comment that I forgot to make. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
It has to do with the delegated authority, and I was curious as to whether or not we might have a body. I think Councillor Beddoes has suggested a few times some sort of a reporting structure in terms of what development projects are going on so that we can actually be brought on board, know what's going on, and so on and so forth. I think that would actually help. I'm also curious as to whether or not the OCP actually provides enough clarity at this point in time to be a sufficient guide, or whether or not we need some sort of policy document to clarify whatever needs clarification. And just a few thoughts on that one that I forgot to make previously.
Back to staff.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. I'd have to have Councillor St-Pierre restate his question.
Can you restate your question, Councillor St-Pierre?
I'm curious as to whether or not the OCP actually provides enough clarity at this point in time to act as a guide for a delegation of authority, or whether or not we would need to have any sort of further policy to help that happen. I'm in favor of delegating authority where it's possible and streamlining the process, but I want to make sure that we're actually keeping the vision of the community and the will of council in mind while that's happening.
So that's
just
not the role of the OCP.
No?
Is to deal with delegated authority. We have a number of bylaws, and there is also authority that's delegated through various acts and regulations. So for example, through the Land Titles Act, there is a body of work that is delegated to the approving officer that council cannot take back, and council can't wade into that work. It's a requirement to have an approving officer, and the approving officer has the sole responsibility for that piece of work under the Land Titles Act. Anything that's within our bylaws, certainly council has a prerogative to change. And a couple of things with the delegated authority by bylaw. Typically, the person that the power is delegated to always has the ability to refer something to council if it's required, or if it's if it's seen to be in the best interest of the application or the community. The other thing is in a bylaw, there's typically a process to appeal something that is delegated through a bylaw, and the appeal body would be council.
I feel like I should apologize.
Your question around the OCP, I don't think that that's the function of the OCP, is to give clarity on what power should be delegated.
All right. I think the reason I brought up the OCP is because when we had the referring to delegating authority to Director of Planning Development, but I think it was specifically with zoning amendments. Were you referring to the Strata? Because that I have no problems with at all. I think that's great. I'm more curious about the zoning amendments, which did seem to say that the OCP would be the guiding document in some way for a form of delegated authority.
No, so the zoning bylaw would be a better tool to talk about that delegation. Or in our case, we've got the delegation of authority through some of the development policies and bylaws.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from anyone here? No? Okay, so question for Ms. Mushata here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recommendations. Do these require to be moved individually, or can they be read out and moved as a block?
Sorry, I got disconnected there momentarily. The question was just about the motion, whether it can be done all together.
Yeah, there's 5 paragraphs here. So should I read out the whole thing, or should they be done individually?
Unless you anticipate that there's going to be any changes to them, I would suggest we just do them as a block.
Okay, so I'm going to do that then, and go from there. Okay, So the recommendation is that council directs staff to bring forward amendments to development application procedures policy number 8.4 2011 to allow for alternative public information gathering compliant with social isolation guidelines when required in accordance with sections 2.8 and 3.9, and that section 7.8 be amended to require submissions to an application to be received by 4 p.m. the day before the council meeting. That council seeks public input for development variance permit applications during a council meeting and accept the submissions as instructed within the notice of meeting date that are to be included in the report to council. That council directs staff to bring forward amendments to development permit delegation bylaw number 705/2018 to include the revised position title of Director of Planning and Development as the delegated authority. That council directs staff to bring forward zoning bylaw amendment applications on a case-by-case basis in accordance with section 464 of the Local Government Act, and to indicate options for attaining public input with each application. And finally, that council directs staff to further explore delegated authority for development permits and minor variance applications and report back to council. Do we have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor McMath and seconded by Councillor St-Pierre. Questions or comments from members of council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Lajeunesse, is that opposed or in favor? Like it went up? There's no, it went
No,
okay, you're in favor.
I'm in favor.
Okay, then that has carried unanimously. So that's a problem with these things. Okay, so that part is done. Thank you, everyone. So then I'll move on to the next one, which is item 10, our bylaw section, 10.1, officers and delegation of authority amendment bylaw. And I'll turn that over to staff to walk us through that report, please.
So this is the delegation of approving authority for residential strata title conversion applications. If you recall from our last council meeting, we did have one of these files on the agenda that council considered. And so timely with that process, what we wanted to highlight again was that that process took 2 council meetings to have that application go forward. So in the event that there were no council meetings being held, that would hold up the application process. So with this policy, previously the approving authority was with the approving officer and that they could approve these types of applications. It was since in 2012 resting with council as the approving authority. And so what staff is bringing forward is for council's consideration, having this delegation put back to the approving officer. And then in those instances, these applications will not have to come forward to council for those considerations, and ultimately eliminating a minimum of 2 council meetings for each application. So the recommendations before you are those steps required to consider this delegation, as well as the last recommendation to further have staff examine the specific policy and see where potential amendments could be made to the policy. Just as we get each application, we see other ways each year that we kind of tweak the process. And so we'd like to have the opportunity to further examine if there are possible amendments for council to consider as well, to help streamline the process and find greater efficiencies for applicants. With that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. BYLAWS. So now we'll go back into our sequential order here, this time starting with Councillor Lajeunesse.
Pass.
Okay, Councillor Loggins?
Yeah, a policy review is always good, but I'm just wondering how frequently we even get into this situation. I don't recall many of these, if any, coming to council, so I don't even know. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's 5 since 2010.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure what, like, it doesn't seem to me like we're actually saving much time, and that I also personally, at least, don't have enough experience with them because of the low number that come to council to know how important it is for them to come to council. That's my thought on it.
No, they're very infrequent. Councillor McMath?
Yeah, I'm all for efficiency, but also there's times where, like I said before, it's paid off to have us go through them. And it's maybe not the most efficient, but at the end of the day, it's been really beneficial to us. If that's the number, then I would just keep it as is. I mean, the recommendation you said came forward because in the event that we weren't able to meet, but we've adapted and we can. And if there's only 5 a year or 5 every so often, then I would just keep it as is. My question was, why was it rescinded in the first place?
I mean, I'm the only one here that, I don't know. I think there was back in 2011 and 12, a lot of changes were made to a lot of policies and a lot of things were brought in-house. There was staffing turnovers. So like everything was brought in, even in terms of how bills were vetted and paid, and then they all shifted. So I don't recall the rationale, only that it was the then mandate of the then council to be a hands-on council.
Okay.
And maybe just due to the infrequent when the delegated authority got reestablished, I don't know if this was just missed because it is infrequent. The one that we just dealt with at our last meeting is sort of the one that's more top of mind for me. I can't recall the others. I mean, it's sorry, but it's 10 years of applications. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Unless staff have any insight as to why, or
That's my general understanding in going through the previous correspondence and discussing this with administration on the potential opportunities for delegation. That was what occurred back in 2012 with a lot of those responsibilities being held with council, and most likely that was the instance when a lot of those delegations were sent back to staff. This possibly was one that was overlooked just due to the infrequency.
Councillor St-Pierre?
I think that although these things happen infrequently, there's no legal requirement for it to come to council, from what I can tell in terms of the municipal charter. This is something where, as the district grows, we have less and less time for meetings to handle more and more business. And this is where you actually have solid policy backed up by good bylaws, backed up by good staff, and you let them do their job so that things can be done efficiently. If we don't have a requirement to deal with this at a council level, I don't actually understand why we'd want to have it in-house handled by council. That's why we have staff.
Councillor Bateman. Thank you. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, let's see. I guess back in 2012, there was that Land Use and Development Committee, which was quite a powerhouse group that was looking to direct things pretty much hands-on. So I guess that was part of why the authority was taken away from staff. I agree with Councillor St-Pierre that we must trust staff. The case that we dealt with last week on the second go round was what, a strata, 2 homes. They wanted to create 4 in a strata setup. It seemed very straightforward to me, but I did enjoy the process of researching that, and it all contributes to my education. Yeah, I think I'll move on to Councillor Beddoes, who has some strong thoughts on this.
Yeah, actually, I do have some strong thoughts on it. First of all, let's make it very clear. I have no problems with staff. Matter of fact, I'm very proud of our staff recently, how they've come together through this crisis, both financially and looking at everything, coming up with solutions for us. So I don't have a problem with staff. What I do have a problem with is, we said we're going to be a hands-on council. And I believe in that. And and the other thing is that I think it's important that we do things in the public eye. And when we delegate the authority, even though it's so minor to me, we might get 1 a year. I think it's important that we do hold it in the public eye, and that we do it at a council meeting. I don't see it as a further burden to the council. We're holding the council meetings anyways. We're not going to hold a special council meeting just for this strata. So I would like to keep it like it is. No reflection on the staff. I think they do a wonderful job. But I think the perception to the public is that's one more thing that council has given away. And we are a hands-on council, at least I hope we are. And I would not support this motion. I think it doesn't do anything for streamlining, and it's important to keep it in the public eye. So I will not be supporting this motion.
Okay, I think there's, we all have our take on this. We do have a delegated authority.
I keep hitting the wrong button here. Sorry about that. I just can't seem to figure out how to use mute. I think one thing though is that we have delegated approval to staff on a number of different items, and so that does already exist with our staff. So I mean, I was comfortable supporting this. I think it was just an oversight that it wasn't picked up when the delegation was addressed in other years. Back in the day when we had that land use and development committee, what ended up happening is applicants would just jump the committee and go straight to council. It was actually slowing down development, and it was harming and causing a lot of hindrance and uncertainty, because there's a committee that doesn't really have, while appointed by council, is only accountable to council and not necessarily the public. So they were actually leapfrogging and going straight to council because it was actually causing problems in the world of the development. And so that's where I think there was a lot of changes that were made to make things a lot better. But at this point, I'll just turn it over to, I'm sort of indifferent on it now.
Just some background on this from my experience. This piece of work is really quite narrow, and it's just got to do with conversions of previously occupied buildings. And at that time, 2012-ish, apartment buildings being stratified, people were losing their rental places because of stratification. So it was really quite controversial at the time. And I can see why council wanted to maybe put their finger on this. But the bottom line is the bylaws say what can be done and what can't be done. And there's very little discretion. So the same decisions will likely be made by council or administration. Council's role is to get that feedback. And if the bylaws need to be changed, then that's council's role, is to change those bylaws to keep them current and reflecting the needs of the community in the current state.
Okay, so hearing that insight now from Mr. McInnes, are there other comments for second time around? Okay, Councillor Logans and McMath. And St-Pierre. Go ahead, Councillor Logans.
I feel like that, and maybe Mr. McInnes can provide a bit more information. Maybe I got lost there, but the comment about the loss of rentals, like with us heading into a potential economic downturn, isn't that very likely to happen again? Not that we can predict the future, but I just feel like that could be something we would want to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I just think we're really fortunate to have, I believe it's 274 units, purpose-built rental coming on stream here shortly with the 2 BC housing builds. So I think we're really fortunate to be having that type of development in our community. And we haven't been given other tools, like we can actually zone for only rental builds. So it may be something that we want to look at somewhere down the road. But yeah, so I think that the stratification piece and making sure that there is decent rental stock in every community is something that we've all been working very hard on in BC. The provincial government is committed to it, and I'm looking forward to seeing those units come on board in suit.
As a renter myself, I'm never qualified to enter those units, unfortunately, and I wish I was. So I know there are a lot of people like me out there who can't access that. And And yeah, it would be good to zone for some rental builds. I know that's something that came up in the Affordable Housing Committee. However, that committee and all others have been halted. So with that in mind, I think I'll not vote against this motion. There is no motion on the table, but if there were.
If there were, you would not vote in favor of it.
I don't currently support the recommendations.
Okay. It's the double negative. Councillor McMahon.
I just wanted to touch on a comment that I've heard a few times, and I always take offense to it. And it's the comment that says that we need to trust the staff. And I extremely dislike that comment because it insinuates that when someone, or if council wants to be more hands-on, or however you want to describe it, insinuates that we don't trust staff, and that's not true. So that comment just really, it irks me. And there's a difference between micromanaging and paying attention. And I think I'm open-minded on this. It's, if we are going to start giving back those pieces, like they were taken away for a reason. So if we're going to start to give back these pieces, I just need confirmation, and I just want to see some sort of plan in place, especially with the current situation, that shows that if we're releasing those pieces back, that the directive that the community wants to take is being captured. So we were going to have like a few committees struck with the development community and those shareholders. And so where have those events and those ideas, how have they changed and how have they adapted? Don't everybody jump in. Yeah, I'm looking for an answer.
Okay, so looking for a reply from staff?
Sorry, I'm actually listening to the mayor's computer because we were getting some feedback issues. So I didn't necessarily hear the direct question.
So my question is if we're to release more things piecemeal back to staff, what is the plan, or what are the timelines, or what structures and adaptations have you guys put in place to capture like the community's directive? So like we were supposed to have a meeting, a bit of like a brainstorming session with shareholders in the development community. And with our current situation, how are you guys adapting plans to still capture those thoughts and those visions and that feedback?
That work will continue, and we will be having a community economic development workshop. I'm still working with Cheryl McLeay to possibly do that virtually, but to do it in person with stakeholders in the community is just, it's not going to happen right now. This is on the agenda this evening only because jointly, council and your administration, we're trying to find some solutions to the current issues. So this was identified as one that we could streamline and keep development applications going forward without having to deal with the public hearing pieces that are in abeyance right now. This one notwithstanding the fact that it's not a public hearing piece, it just seemed like a fairly simple piece. Like, as I said, the decision that council made very likely would be the same decision that administration would make in this case. And as I said, if the applicant doesn't like the decision, then there is an appeal process.
Right. Yeah, and I totally appreciate that and where you're coming from. And this isn't just on this topic in particular. It just kind of triggers a bunch of others that there's parallels with that. And so it would be really great to hear, like how you said you're talking with Cheryl about how you guys are adapting and how you're still capturing like those thoughts and those directives.
For sure. It's just
crazy times.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks.
Councillor St-Pierre is next.
So what I'm hearing, and I agree with the keeping eyes on things, is that we need clear policy. I think that Councillor McMath has pointed to that. In terms of rentals, we need to make it clear that with our housing needs assessment and so on and so forth, we need to protect our rental stock, our housing stock. What Mr. McInnes has indicated, though, is that the bylaws and the rules that actually apply in this particular case wouldn't leave a lot of wiggle room to make too many different choices. It's really a matter of applying the rules, and then something comes out the other end. In this particular case, I still think that's more the job of council. There is an appeal process. I do like the idea of having some sort of a body or committee that actually looks over things for not necessarily the strata type decisions, but other types of decisions where a delegated authority might be possible. Because I do think that the will of council, the will of the community, and our input is important. In terms of Councillor Beto's concerns over the public, I think there's a ton of stuff that goes on that never comes to council that is often very troubling to the public. I don't know if this is necessarily the thing. We often have developments that are approved simply because they don't need to come to council because that's not actually something that comes to council. I don't know if this is where I would draw that particular line in the sand. I think this is just really a staff thing that got missed and should probably be passed on. But that's my thought.
Again, I'd love to respond, Your Worship, if I could. Notwithstanding the fact that something is not on a council agenda, it really is the policy and bylaw framework that is council's to own and to amend and to keep current. So what we do with these applications is we just follow the bylaws and the policies that are approved by council.
Hey, Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, an interesting discussion, but I thought the whole purpose of this exercise was to, eliminate public hearings during this COVID epidemic, and this doesn't do anything for that. I mean, we get one application a year or one every 2 years, so I don't see, as this is first of all, a very important item, and B, it is no reflection on the staff. And I do take offense sometimes, but I don't think the staff is questioning us, questioning them. I think we've given lots of indications that we're very up on staff. They're doing a pretty good job. But again, it's the public perception. And as I can't remember, was it Tony, Councillor St-Pierre was saying, there's a lot of perception in the public that things are done behind closed doors. And there is mention about there is an appeal process to council, but if it goes the other way too much in favor of the applicant and against what the public thinks, who appeals it? The public appeal it or the person that's putting in the application? So I am still very comfortable leaving it where it is. Again, it might just be semantics and impressions to the public. I don't see it streamlining anything that we're doing in the next couple of years. So I will be voting against if we have a motion.
So there's no motion, but what you could do, Councillor Beddoes, is put one forward now, which is basically to receive the report for information.
Well, I'd be willing to receive the report for information, but I'm not willing to just recommend anything. Just receive it for information. I'll make that motion.
Okay, is there a seconder? And that's seconded by Councillor Logans to just receive this for information. We've sort of heard from everyone. Is there anything that anyone would like to add to motivate or suggest differently? Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, before that motion was made, I was about to make a note that, as I understand it, this particular item was missed in the development permit delegation bylaw of 2018. And in terms of trust towards our staff, our Director of Planning and Development has the right, as he noted in his previous report, all single-family residential developments, any multifamily residential developments, commercial, industrial, or institutional developments of a size up to 2,500 square meters, development permits. Al, turn your mic off.
Sorry.
Or share your gum. But anyway, just the point here is that our staff do have a lot of authority and under our development permit delegation bylaw. And like the mayor on this one, I'm indifferent because as Councillor Beddoes states, it comes up pretty infrequently.
So just to clarify what you said, Councillor Bateman, the development committee is the one that's recommending that this, like you referenced something early from 2018, and it was the former development committee that would like to see this return to staff and it got missed?
No, this was
Okay.
this was the creation of development permit delegation bylaw number 705 in 2018. I think that was before our time, and I believe this is one small item that was theoretically should have been part of that bylaw.
And then
Anyway.
that recommendation came from the development committee that
Oh,
existed.
did it? Okay.
Well, all of that came from, I asked staff just to look at what that committee had recommended because I had just drawn a blank on it, but all of that came from that particular committee, a development committee.
Okay.
But it may just have been that it wasn't top of mind because of the infrequent nature of it.
Right.
So it's just interesting because I think this is where sometimes committees recommend something that council may choose to either implement or not implement, and then down the road you hear, well, you're not listening to the committee, but even though it was brought forward, and we don't always follow through necessarily, we don't always just accept what comes from a committee, so it's just the way it goes. Okay, so there's a motion on the floor now. Councillor St-Pierre, to the motion, please.
Very briefly, I think I was the person who used the language trusting staff. I probably should have said something like let staff do the work. So if that offends people, I'm sorry about that. It was never meant to. And just thought I'd mention that.
Okay, thank you. So the motion on the floor is to receive this for information. So that would just mean that the status quo prevails. Anything further on the motion? All in favor of the motion? Opposed to the motion? Councillor St-Pierre is opposed. Motion carries. So it just remains as is. Okay, moving on to item 11 is our notice of motion. Hold on a second. Yes, that is our notice of motion section. So we have one from Councillor St-Pierre here, and I'll invite Councillor St-Pierre to read out his motion.
Okay, so whereas Council Strategic Plan includes food security as an objective, that the following recommendations from the Climate Action Committee's Food Security Working Group be adopted into the Council Strategic Plan, and that food security be made a District of Sauk priority. First, invite the Sauk Nation to the food security table. 2, review, adopt, and initiate the 2012 Sauk Agricultural Plan. 3, support the formation of a food policy council and the adoption of a food charter. 4, use the OCP review to update a food systems plan. 5, initiate a feasibility study for a food hub. And 6, participate in the regional food strategy.
Okay, so I'll be looking for a seconder to that notice of motion, to that motion. That's been moved now by Councillor St-Pierre, so it's seconded by Councillor Bateman. And discussion, go ahead, Councillor St-Pierre, as the mover.
Okay, I'm just bringing up the document. So basically, COVID-19 has shown the gaps in our food system in terms of access and supply chains. Locally, everyone in our community, at least, is trying to work together. Transition Sauk has brought together a group of local stakeholders in the food system, and they're working together to basically try and address some of those gaps. We have vulnerable members of our community, including children, elders, seniors, so on and so forth, that are going to be really affected by the loss of revenue and the loss of income during this period. It makes a lot of sense for us to step up to the plate in terms of our own strategic plan and actually put some items under our food security piece. So right now we have food security, but it's not populated by any tasks. The Climate Action Committee, through the Food Security Working Group, has actually come up with a strong set of recommendations that actually fit in with our documents that we already have pre-existing, like the 2012 Sauk Agricultural Plan, which is an excellent document. I agree with Ellen Lewis, that it needs to be reviewed. That's actually part of the motion, that we should actually review before we initiate. But at the same time, most of the document is excellent. And I'm sure that we can actually figure out which pieces we want to move forward on as soon as possible. For the rest, it basically boils down to working with the Sauk, who are here and have traditionally a deep knowledge of food, and it's very much a part of their culture. So having them, if they have the time and the availability of resources to work with us, just makes a lot of sense. A food policy council would actually bring those stakeholders together permanently, ideally. The question would be how we want to support them, but that's not actually part of the motion at all. It's simply a task of the strategic plan and something to move forward with. Incorporating a food systems plan into the OCP is basically probably a matter of referring back to the agricultural plan, but food systems also include things like hunting, which might include a wildlife management strategy, fishing, aquaculture, which is happening already with the Sauk. So an agricultural plan is not necessarily sufficient to incorporate all that we wanted to have in the food systems. And the regional food strategy is basically understanding that our food systems don't stop at our municipal borders. Basically, our food comes from the entire region, ideally, the entire world at this point in time. But if we want to look at food security, it has to incorporate the region. So actually being at the table in terms of a regional strategy makes sense. And if anybody has any questions, I'm available to answer.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Bateman as the seconder, and then to Councillor Beddoes, and then Councillor McMath.
Are we not going in order?
Well, I'm going to the seconder.
And then order by...
Okay, and then I'll go back to the order. That seems
Okay,
to work. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Bateman as the seconder.
Okay, I just like the way this is being framed. It is, these points have been deliberated over and refined and brought forward. Here we have 2.5 in our strategic plan, has no action items. These 5 can be dropped in, and we can later look at, or now, next, or later, prioritize these. Certainly the agricultural plan, the shock to me was that it had never been adopted back in 2012. And it is a very fine document that it does need to be re-examined, but it's there. And in these, as Councillor St-Pierre has eloquently stated, in these times we need to really look to food security as a primary need here in the community.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bateman. So going through the order, that puts Councillor Logans up next, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor St-Pierre, for bringing forward food security. It will, and well, it always was, and certainly will be even more important. I do have a lot of questions and concerns about this particular setup, though. My first would be, how financially feasible is this? We are just cutting the budget, and we would need funding for committees and reports and community input and that sort of thing. And what would the timeline be for it as well? I feel like if this were actually specific to a COVID emergency, then we should probably just be putting funding towards something. I know that the food bank always says the best way to get food in someone's hands is just by giving them cash so that they can do what they need to do to get that work done. That's not to say that this plan isn't important in the way that it's laid out, because I think it is, but I don't think it is in the short term. It is most certainly in the long term, though, which is why it would be good to have this included in the strategic plan. However, I would like to do that when we do our next strategic plan review. And that way, as Councillor Bateman said, we can prioritize those items and do the work that needs to be done to get those reports out and those plans out. Because as Mrs. Lewis said, and also as I noticed as I looked over the agricultural plan, it does need updating, definitely, and vetting by the public. And so right now it's just really difficult to include the public in these discussions. But of course there's online versions of that. Again, I go back to the financial feasibility and the timeline to achieve this. I think that those are all my questions and comments at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Logan. So, Councillor McMath, you're up next.
Okay. Yes, I agree with Councillor Logan's statement about the timeline and prioritization. I'm going to challenge you a little bit here because I feel like the food security issue is becoming a bit of a buzzword, especially now. And I just would like you to define what your expectation of food security is. Are you talking about like organic perishable food items, or are you talking about craft dinner? Because I would kind of challenge you to say that there isn't a food security issue at all. And I feel a little bit like a lot of this push comes from one pool, like one specific group of shareholders who share like a like-minded perspective. And I know some of them even had like the same professor who has very extreme views on this topic. And so like things I would like be curious, like do you connect with local grocers? Like how much food do they throw out a month? Like I'm just looking for more of a definition and like what your achievable goals here are when you talk about food security, because it's such a massive spread. Like there's so many, I'm just unclear on what exactly it is that you're looking for. I do love the idea of like the encouragement and the learning perspective. And one of my first jobs I ever had was working at an establishment that basically invented the 100-mile diet. So I completely appreciate the power and the potential of it. It's just right now it's feeling a bit like a buzzword, and like I'm just really not clear on the direction here.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I'll go to next up is Councillor Beddoes, please.
There we are. Yeah, first of all, you know, I like the concept, but this is so vague. You know, it's just sort of, I'll do it one by one. Invite this Sauk Nation to the food security table, of course. But item 2, review, adopt, and initiate the 212 Sauk agricultural plan. You've got it signed, sealed, and delivered in one statement. I'd only be happy with review the 212 Sauk agricultural plan, because obviously there's problems with it. Ms. Lures alluded to it. Councillor St-Pierre said it wasn't perfect, needs to be reviewed. So why would we have adopt and initiate it all in one word? I'm happy with review the 212 Sauk agricultural plan. That's okay. It's there, it's something we can look at. I haven't had time to do it yet. Again, I like the concept of it, but then again, you know, support the formation of a food policy council and adoption of a food charter. I need information there. I mean, another broad motherhood statement, but with no details. I mean, what does that look like? What does it cost? Who would be involved in that? I mean, it's a charter. It's a fairly big document. I don't mind them working on it. So, you know, again, that's one of those motherhood things. The OCP to update the food systems plan. I don't even know what that means. Initiate a feasibility study for a food hub. Again, what's that costed out to be like? These are wonderful things, but they're just motherhood statements, and the committee has to come back with some details about these suggestions. They may be wonderful things, but there's nothing here. They're just a motherhood statement. Yeah, we all want food security, but I'm sort of going with Councillor McMath here. Is you know, is it the right thing to say, the right thing to do? But there's no substance here. This is just what the council wants to work on. Well, they can work on it all they like, but I want, before I vote on anything, I want to see some detailed plans of what they mean about the 212 agricultural plan, what their suggestions are. So I'm not in favor of the way it's written. It has to be reworked to me, bring it back into something a little bit clearer than what I have in front of me. I can't support it the way it is.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lajeunesse, please.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Beddoes that I need a little bit more information on this. I do agree that important. Probably most of our food comes from the U.S. and with the way the U.S. is acting right now, that could be cut off at any moment. All you have to do is say something that the president doesn't agree with, and he'll cut you off in a heartbeat. So food security is an important issue for us, but yeah, I need more information than this to support it fully.
Okay, so for myself, should council wish to advance this, for myself is I would like to see it referred to staff and to then have a sense of how it fits in, because something will need to drop. If this becomes a priority, then not everything can be a priority. So this is where, just touching on what Councillor Logan's has said, I need to understand how it will weave into our strategic plan, and then what resources would be necessary from staffing, given that we've already passed the directive not to hire anyone new and to remain at zero. Where can this fit in with current work plans and the like? And just where we at with those objectives. So, and just how it fits in with the OCP, the agricultural plan and the like. I'm not comfortable now adopting something that's nearly 10 years old. So just sort of touching on a bit what Councillor Beddoes had said, yes, it is timely to review this. I don't know why it wasn't adopted. Maybe it was the timing of the document, but to now sort of adopt something that is that dated it doesn't make sense to me. If it was an oversight, it should have been done some time ago. So, you know, I'm interested in seeing what pieces we could do here, but it does need, I would need it to move to staff, and I would want a report to come back to us to then understand how it will flow into the current workloads and our current priorities. And then council will need to weigh in to what do you want to advance and what do you want to shelve, and we would need to have that discussion. So I'll go back for a second time, given that this is on the table. So over to Councillor St-Pierre, if you want to speak further.
Absolutely. I'd like to respond to a few of the thoughts. I have no issues with referring to staff and getting staff input. That would be welcome. The question of financial feasibility, at this point in time, some of the recommendations, and especially the more timely ones in terms of the pandemic, which is another question. What is there in here that's actually tangible that can actually deal with food security issues during a pandemic? That's about having a food council. A lot of our stakeholders in terms of food security have come together to deal with the issues surrounding the pandemic. So do we recognize them or not? Do we support them or not? They're doing the work to actually support our people with food security during the pandemic. A food council basically gets stakeholders together to fill some of those gaps, coordinates people to actually work towards food security. They do the work that we don't need to. It's not necessary that we should have all of the answers, because this is a huge question. And there's going to be work to be done in a multitude of different areas. There's going to be work to be done in terms of distribution, in terms of actually looking at how we deal with the ALC, how we deal with farming, what kind of regulations we can change, what do we do with backyard chickens. There's just an enormous number of things that we could be doing. But it's much easier to actually have a body like a food council that actually brings recommendations forward to council or puts forward stuff like that. Some of that material is already in the agricultural plan, certainly needs to be reviewed. But I've looked at the document, and by and large, it's actually quite excellent. Yeah, there's some stuff that's dated, but it gives us a good starting point. We don't necessarily have forever to address some of these things. As Councillor Lecheness has pointed out, our food from California could be cut off next year, and that's about 50% of our vegetables. How soon do we actually want to start moving? Most of the stuff is actually general, and this is an answer to Councillor Beddoes, because by and large, we need to define some of this stuff further with staff resources and to figure out what we want to do. But having food security, which is an extremely important thing to the entire community in terms of making sure people are fed and making sure there's actually, things happening in the future for us in terms of that sort of thing. When food does get cut off from the states, because they don't have the water in the aquifers to keep producing the food. So what do? We actually need to address this. Most of the recommendations are not about specifics, because it's about actually moving forward with food security as a district. I have no problems referring to staff. I have no problems actually doing further work on this.
Thank you, Councillor St-Pierre. To Councillor Bateman, and then I'll go back through the order again.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little disappointed given that we have this 2.5 on the strat plan. There is no actions whatsoever. Here were 6 actions to drop in to park effectively, like other things have been parked in our strat plan. For example, I don't know, I don't think we've done a budget analysis yet of continuing to expand the neighborhood pod system, for example, among other examples within our strat plan. And we do have this wonderful now, next, later template. So I'd agree with Councillor Logan's, there's good logic to wait for our next strat plan review, which I think is in June, or was going to be thereabouts. In terms of food supply, as it's often stated, we have 72 hours worth of fresh food on the island to keep us going. I think back when there was an analysis done at the Souk food shed 3 or 4 years ago, it was identified that about 1% of food consumption in the Souk area is local. And it was felt that we could perhaps, through some strategic involvement of the district and other regional government, to bump that up to 5%. And that would create all sorts of activity. And as we'll see with the next item, next notice of motion, there are plans to help people learn how to grow food more effectively at this point in time. So yeah, I would agree that we can hold this off until the next strat review, but always with the recognition that we are parking these items, and we're also showing some due respect to the Climate Action Committee and their food security working group, who have come up with what are a pretty logical set of future initiatives.
Okay, Councillor Logans.
Thanks. Side note, wish we had committees still. But my wish for this would be that we rescind the motion, and as Councillor Bateman said, we park these items for the strat plan. There is space in there for some of these at least. I feel like if we were to do anything specific to our current emergency, we should be ready to fund any emergency, not just food security. It's something we'll certainly have to keep an eye out for, but Councillor St-Pierre did mention that it's about moving forward with security, with food security, and it is something that needs to be front of mind as we work through this COVID situation, but also through our OCP, etc. So again, I'd like to see it discussed at the strategic plan and see where we can plunk some of these in and which ones are actually feasible.
Councillor McMath.
I think before it even gets to the strat plan, I would just like to see it refined more, because I still don't understand when you say that we need to start working on food security. Like, there's no measurables, like there's no step 1, step 2, step 3, even if it's just in general terms, it's still, I still have no idea what we're going after here. So I feel like it could fall under the climate change committee as something that they could help shape and help refine. And then that refined piece would be brought to staff so that they would have a clear directive, so that they could give us an actual, like an accurate assessment of what the, not the cost, but what we would have to trade or to sacrifice, potentially. That is all.
Okay. Councillor Beddoes.
There we go. Yeah, first of all, you know, I don't want to diminish the work that this working group has done. There are some good things here, but they do need to be flushed out. Again, I go back to the agricultural plan. Maybe this committee could look at that 212 plan and send us a one-page brief on it. And the same with the Food Policy Council. What does that look like? I don't know. Is there a food policy council, some other municipality that we could have a look at, because I don't know what it means. It might be a good idea. Initiate for study for a food hub. Well, I agree. We should study a food hub. And, you know, I like Councillor St-Pierre's original one of where it was and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not saying these are bad ideas, but we've got this working group and they're doing some nice work here. Can they not flush these things out a bit better, and then we can have a look at something a little bit more concrete? Again, these may be really good. And again, the staff has to have input for their ideas of what a food hub is, what a food policy council looks like in other municipalities, and what's the costing. So I think to look at these again, I think we are moving ahead. I think that COVID would be done by the time we come up with something, but it's better than not doing anything. And again, this committee, working group, I think they're the ones that can give us a lot of this insight and more information on what we need to move ahead. But there's not enough here for me to move ahead at this particular time. That's it.
So the working group wouldn't, I mean, they may be working on the side, but because none of the committees are meeting right now, that's part of the challenge. So really, like, a subgroup should put forward recommendations to the main committee, and then that committee would make recommendations to council. So that typically would be the process that we would look at. But it's just with the pandemic, of course, now that's just interrupted everything. So what I'm sitting here is just, you know, just given the reality of where we're at is a way to advance this. So I'll turn to Councillor Lajeunesse, but I just wanted to answer the piece on the working group, is that would be how the structure would go, and I'm just not certain when they're going to be able to start meeting fully. It would just depend on when we can start opening the building up to the public again. Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, as I said, food security is a serious issue that we need to deal with. But I'm not, I need more definition, I guess, as to what we're actually talking about here before we can move forward with it. So definitely need some more discussion and to come up with a plan that we can wrap our heads around, I suppose.
Okay, so there's two, I'm hearing two different pieces here from council. One of them is to, I've heard park these until we have our strategic planning session. That makes sense, but I'm also hearing that council would need more information there. I hear it to go back to the committee, in which case we're going to have to wait until, you know, committees can meet again. Another option would just be to refer this to staff and to come back to an upcoming, you know, when, you know, they'll provide some feedback in terms of how we can incorporate this into a strategic plan. I'm hearing that council does support the concept overall and would like to see something in the strategic plan, and just some of the details are unknown because we just need more information on what this all means and what it means for Stuk and that sort of thing. So I'll turn it to the mover of the motion, Councillor St-Pierre. Right now, there is a motion on the floor, so I'll turn it to you to if you want to propose an amendment or what you would like to do.
There seem to be a number of options. I appreciate that this is a lot of information and that people are having trouble actually wrestling with why some of these things might be there. So I do have we may have the option that I could come back. I have an entire PowerPoint presentation that I did actually for the Climate Caucus around food security that addressed some of these issues and why they actually were brought forward. So I could potentially make that available to staff, or I could rescind the motion, bring this forward at a future meeting, and we could basically provide more information. So that is one option. I would like to point out that food security shouldn't be considered too costly or too complicated to start working on. And I understand that it's complicated because I've been working on it for a while, and it was really hard to come up with some basic recommendations that give us a toehold towards moving forward. So it is complicated. And I understand that it can be costly, but you know, lots of people like eating. So I think that's just something we have to put up with. And we have people in our community that are going to find it very costly to eat. So actually working on things like backyard gardens and increasing our food security locally just makes a lot of sense. It's also a huge economic driver for any community. There's a lot of spin-off jobs from agriculture and from farming. So there's other benefits that actually address some of our other strategic priorities. What I would like to, I appreciate our mayor's summation, because I'm not sure where to go with this at this point. I mean, do we take it to staff? Do you
I
want
would
me to-
just, I would refer to staff. I mean, I'm hearing that we have to build out some points in our strategic plan, and it's all fine to do that. I just need to see how it all fits in together, and I think that's a piece only that I would trust Mr. McInnes to sort of answer there. So you know, if someone's comfortable with referring it to staff, Councillor McMath, is that why your hand is up?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not referring it. I just have questions. But
Okay, because
I can wait
everyone
till
has
the
spoken
motion.
twice now in terms of procedures, but I'll allow you to speak for a third time. Just
I
keep
can
it.
wait till there's a motion and then speak to it.
There is a motion. The motion has been moved and seconded already, so this whole motion is on the floor right now.
So I
And
still don't.
Call the question.
Okay, so nobody wants to refer to staff? It's hard to do a point of order when I can't.
No, that's a
can't.
point of order. You
I have
can't
like
ask
3
for a
people
motion.
talking at me
You can't have a
at
motion.
once, and I can't hear you when I'm talking, so.
Well,
because
point of
I'm-
order. Point of order. You cannot have a motion on top of a motion. You can't ask us who wants to have a referral to staff when we have a motion on the floor.
Do I
we
have the
a
option of
motion on
rescinding the motion?
floor, that's correct. Not all of council got that. And then I saw 3 people try to speak at the same time, so that's what I'm trying to suss out here.
What?
The point of, and
Councillor.
so what I have heard, I heard refer and I heard point of order at the same time. So I'm going to go to our corporate officer just to get clarity on whether or not this can be referred to staff.
I'm not certain that Caroline is still with us. I believe she had to go home. Are you still on, Caroline?
I think that's a.
This is Jen. I'm just recording it, and Carolyn has left.
So can this be referred?
I can call.
Well, we have to deal with the motion that's on the floor.
Okay, so my advice here from staff is to call the question, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Councillor, keep your hands up, please. Councillor Logans, Councillor Beddoes, Councillor Lajeunesse, and Councillor McMath are opposed. I was in favor of having it moved to staff, so motion is defeated. So that's that. So we'll move on to the next.
Wait,
Do we have the option of moving to staff at this point to have an additional motion?
I don't have our corporate officer, but I'm hearing that that'll work. So why don't you try it and see what happens?
Okay. I make the motion to refer this motion to staff, or the points of this motion to staff.
I would just move 11.1 to staff to report back, because
There we
it's
go.
all there. Like it's 11.1, isn't it?
Move 11.1 to staff to report.
Okay. Is there a seconder? Councillor Beddoes is seconding it.
No,
And I'll go to Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, I think this is probably the best route. It's too bad that Councillor St-Pierre was willing to withdraw his motion and make this one, I think, but it got caught up. That's okay. I think this is going to work out a bit better. I understand Councillor St-Pierre's frustration, but I didn't want it to die. I'm much happier with this going to staff and that everything's still there than a complete defeat, and then we forget about it. there's too much work gone into it. So I'm willing to support this second motion that it goes to staff and it can be brought back for further discussion later on, and we can actually make some progress. So I'm happy with this second outcome. I know it's not exactly what Councillor St-Pierre wants, but I think it will come to the same end. So I'm happy to support this second motion.
Okay, is there anything further on this motion? We've had a discussion, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. It'll go to staff. And in the meantime, I urge all of you to actually click on some of these links and do some homework and reading on the discovery of what food security is for the Sauk region and some of the details of the agricultural plan, so that we'll be better prepared for when the staff do report out to us.
Okay. Councillor McMath.
It has nothing to do with a lack of comprehension of the topic. It's I'm just not clear on what the expectation or the measurables are. Like, what is the first step here? And so then my second question is to staff, is even just doing this assessment feasible with your current workload right now?
So if it could, Your Worship, I will respond to that.
Okay.
And I really appreciate the debate and discussion around the issue, but really what we're struggling with here or working with here is the whole notice of motion thing, and the fact of the understanding that I think I have with council is that I don't take direction from one member of council, I take direction from council as a whole. So what we're trying to get is consensus from council right now, whether this is a priority and whether it is something that you want to task your administration with doing work on right now. So there are a number of things that could happen, but what I'm hearing right now is that we put these 6 items under actions under 2.5, and I believe that 2.5 is still a later item in our strategic plan, and that then that strategic plan with these 6 action items under 2.5 will come forward to the next service level review, where we have committed to reprioritizing our priorities on an annual basis. So I believe that that's where we're at right now, and that would be minimal work to do. If we wanted to flush this out and then fill in some of the deliverables, the milestones under these actions, that would require some work with the committee to say, we will commit to doing this by this day, and this is the person that's responsible for that. So I don't think that that's what I'm being asked to do at this point. What I'm being asked to do at this point, put them in as actions under that 2.5, and then they will stay there until we reprioritize council priorities, and hopefully you're correct, Councillor Bateman, we still are looking at June 15th to do that service level review, if at all possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McInnes. So we have this on the floor, and what the point I was trying to make earlier is that any motion can be amended at any time. So that's where I was looking earlier to see if someone was going to amend the motion, but whatever, it's here now. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Just hold it. I have Councillor St-Pierre in favor, Councillor Beddoes in favor.
Could you reread, please, for me?
The motion is that 11.1 be referred to staff for a report. Right? So all those in favor, and please keep your hand up because the squares have moved. Councillor Lajeunesse, Councillor McMath, Councillor Beddoes, and Councillor St-Pierre and Councillor Bateman are in favor. I'm self in favor. All those opposed? Councillor Logans is opposed. The motion carries. Okay. Next one up is 11.2, second notice of motion from Councillor St-Pierre. So go ahead, Councillor St-Pierre.
All right, so this is some of that work at a community level that actually addresses the pandemic.
Okay, you need to just read it out, and if it's seconded, then you can motivate.
Sorry. No, the district of Sauk contribute $1,660 from its community grants program, which doesn't exist. So actually from council contingency to support the Sauk Region Food Cheese Sauk Region Backyard Gardens project.
Do I have a seconder for this motion? Councillor Bateman has seconded the motion. Okay, so go ahead, Councillor St-Pierre first, then Councillor Bateman, and then I'll go to the order starting with Councillor McMath.
Okay, so straight up, this is a way for us to actually help our residents actually meet their food needs. We have the Supuchi taking the lead, but also working with the Garden Club and other food stakeholders in the community to actually help residents start their own gardens. They're actually working with a number of other organizations, as was, all this information was actually on the April 14th. I don't know why it wasn't included here, but whatever. So they've got a really tight proposal. Fuchi has a good history in terms of its reporting, in terms of using the money well, and so on and so forth. This will actually help families when they're out of work. They have more time for the gardening. They can actually make sure that they're actually feeding themselves. They can help themselves financially, and they can build skills. It's a relatively small amount. With the community grants program no longer operating, it would have to go to our contingency fund, and I'm looking for support for the motion.
Okay, Councillor Bateman.
So this, yeah, we did receive a full budget at the last meeting from Suk Region Food Chi, and it's a $3,200 program, total expenses, and we're being asked for $1,660 of it. And already the program is moving ahead and probably will continue to move ahead regardless, and will definitely move ahead regardless of our involvement. 12 families have signed up. There's a crew of volunteers have been created. Suk Soil and Landscape has donated 5 yards of deluxe garden mix soil. Suk Baptist Church will be the distribution point for the program. Yeah, so it will be moving ahead, and the key is that the FED program is dedicated to families who have been struck by the COVID crisis and lost work, and as Councillor St-Pierre says, have some time on their hands, and they have a backyard that's ready to be tilled and planted, and there will be some expertise as well to help people like you, Mayor Tait, grow better strawberries, whatever it is you've got in that backyard of yours. Okay.
Just needs water.
Water.
Anyway, regularly. Okay, Councillor McMath.
I don't have a comment at this time.
Councillor St-Pierre has moved it, so Councillor Bateman. Councillor Beddoes.
There we go. Well, I don't have a big problem. $1,600 is not a whole lot of money in this days. I guess the problem I have with it is that we just gunned all those community grants, and some of them are very worthwhile as well. And we just gunned the whole works of them. How does it look that we get a late application that was supposed to go to this community grants, and we don't reconsider anybody else's, but we reconsider this? I think we can get away with it because of the COVID thing, but it just doesn't 100% sit right with me. But I'm willing to support it just because of the times and these people that are at home. There's time in their hands, and if we can get 24 people growing gardens, I think it'll pay off to $1,600 really quick. But I don't like the optics of it, but I don't know what we can do about that. But that bothers me, because you're going to have some of those other people coming back and say, hey, look, you gunned ours without any consultation at all. And yet this late arrival comes in, and everybody can see that it came in and it was for the community grants, and you found a way around it. So are we prepared to find a way around some of the other ones? That's the question I'm wrestling with. But the idea of $1,600, if this hadn't come in for the community grants and it came in a week later, I would support it. I'd pay for it out of our council stuff if need be. But geez, it doesn't look good. So that's my comment. Anybody else can comment on it too.
No, it's a very valid point, Councillor Beddoes. Councillor Lajeunesse.
Nothing to add, but I have to agree with Councillor Meadows on this.
Councillor Logans?
I am definitely not in favor of this whatsoever. The program is wonderful, but the way in which this occurred is not appropriate for council. Circumventing the system through a councillor to get a grant funding is not okay. And regardless of whether that funding comes from grants or from council contingency, it's just a way to get around not applying for the program, which ended up being canceled anyhow. On a lighter note, it is nice to hear that they have applications, because when I visited the website, it did say that they've had to cancel the program in the past because of low registration. So it does seem like it has been gaining momentum due to the current situation. And due to that, I would say see how it goes first before funding a program that has previously failed.
Thank you, Councillor. So, you know, I love the idea of the program for sure. I'm just not comfortable funding it this way, because we did make a difficult decision in terms of eliminating the entire program. And this is where at the time there was a concern, well, there are some valid applications. And then, so it's just what would it open the door? Because then we would need to then be prepared for the other applications to come forward, which we're not. So I agree with Councillor Meadows and Councillor Logans on this, in the sense of how we're going to progress this when the program itself has been canceled. So unfortunately, I can't support this in this way. Councillor St-Pierre.
When the community grants were cut, I brought up several times that there was the risk of actually not having money available to actually deal with community organizations that were trying to help during the crisis, and that how were we actually going to fund those. And the answer at that point in time was that we could use council contingency. And I asked at that point in time, well, are we going to top up council contingency? Well, we could if we needed to, but that wasn't necessarily going to be considered. Now, what it sounds like is that this is a matter of bad timing and optics for a program that directly helps us in a crisis. So I'd like to know how to get through this, because I don't think that optics should stop us from doing the work that we should be doing and the work the community needs us to do. And I see hands going up, but this is in our strat plan to support food security, and we have people that are going to go hungry. And this is not a lot of money, and it will allow the program to expand at a time when people are willing to learn, have the time to learn. This is going to contribute to long-term food security. We were looking for specific tasks under that were actionable. This is actionable. I understand that there's issues in terms of cutting programs, but I think that if we actually specify that we're basically funding programs that help people in need during a crisis, I would welcome other community groups to come forward and get funding from council contingency for that same reason. I think that that's the simplest way in terms of the optics. What we're looking for here are programs that can help us in a time of crisis.
But have we as a council decided that we're putting that out to the community, that if you have in these times, like that has not been a communication that we have discussed? So that could come at another conversation. Like part of the discussion with the grants was, do we put a COVID lens? We agreed that we would not, and the program was just eliminated. So in which case, then in this way, we would need to almost create a grant program to deal with people. And we discussed and didn't go down that avenue, that we were not doing that. So, like there hasn't been any communication out to the community that if you have a program that meets the pandemic, to bring it forward. So this would be that would be a whole other conversation to have. But I have not said that, and I have not heard that from other members of council until now. Councillor McMath, I believe you had your hand up.
You stole my point, which was perfect, which is just, it goes back to like our previous meeting, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose of what we agreed upon. It's also keep hearing the term crisis over and over and over again, and this program which has failed previously, is not an immediate solution to a crisis. So while I'm with you in the sense of supporting like avenues that would help the immediate crisis, this isn't one of those.
Councillor St-Pierre, you've already spoken on it twice, though.
Mhm.
So
It's up to
keep
you.
it. Keep it quick.
Keep it quick. People are experiencing a financial crisis because they have no work. They have time to work on gardens when they have no work. They're going to be having a hard time paying their bills. This helps. It's a financial crisis for them.
Okay, I'm not certain. We have about 1,000 residents in Souk now that are reliant on the food bank, and and that's where I'm glad that the line item for the food bank has been untouched and that they've received funding from the Rapid Relief Fund, because they were the very first group to reach out to me out of concern. And then the next has been small business owners and, concerned about their employee. And, and I don't disagree that food security, I think this is a wonderful program, but we also went through the process of adopting a policy so that funding asks wouldn't come to council. Like there's, and go through that way. So I just think that if we were going to enable groups to do this, we would need to create a different program that would be fair and open to a number of community groups within the community. That's just my point. Anything further from anyone? And I'll otherwise call the question. Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, I would agree that we have a major procedural problem here in that Souk Foodchi utilized the community grant program application form. I think this was submitted after the deadline, which happened to fall on the same day that BC declared a state of emergency. So yeah, so there's a problem with the procedure, and unlike, say, the Souk Fastball or the Lions, who know how to approach us through a delegation to seek a contingency grant, contingency funding, Foodchi did not take that approach, and as Councillor Beddoes said, that would have been a very different result likely tonight. So.
But even on that note, Councillor Bateman, that's where the delegation and all of that process has been changed so that groups cannot approach council to access contingency. So that's all been part of a new policy that council has adopted. The delegations are to bring different matters to our attention, not to come to council for funding.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify. So on this, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? So I have Councillor Beddoes, Councillor McMath, Councillor Lajeunesse, Councillor Loggins, and myself opposed. The motion fails. Okay, item
0 for
12.
2.
12.1, Denwood Holdings 2076 Otter Point Road. And here we have correspondence regarding 2076 Otter Point Road here for information. I'll look for a motion that council received the correspondence from Rory Morahan regarding the property at 2076 Otter Point Road for information. Moved by Councillor St-Pierre and seconded by Councillor McMath. Any questions or comments? No. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Item 13, council verbal reports. Councillor Beddoes.
Well, nobody's lynched me yet because the Sea Park, although they're probably after the mayor, there may be torches on your property. But there's surprisingly not as many complaints as I thought. And I don't know how to respond to them. Well, there's been a lot, but it's like the one today. How do you respond to that? Do you want me to write something? I could, but I'm at the point where, there's enough information out there that is not how it's perceived by a very, very few people. And it's proceeding. And one of the first mistakes is they say council decided this. It wasn't council that decided this. It was Sea Park Commission, which has council representative, but it's also the Wanda Fuca. I think they've got a very good plan in place. And quite frankly, if we didn't go for it, the province was going to do it regardless. And at least this way, we were able to get a contract for $100 a day. Hopefully everybody knows this. And $9,000 startup and teardown. And it's just for the arena floor. It's not the pool. It's not the gym. It's not any of the offices or the swim washrooms or anything. They just get one washroom, and it's going to be well supervised 24/7. I think it's a great stopgap, and I'm not unhappy that we did it. I just all these comments about Topaz Park and downtown. That's not how it's developing here. So, just if anybody has any questions for me, I'm pretty much up on the subject. But it's been an interesting time. I know the mayor's spoken to the press on it. I have, and Jen Wild. So it's going ahead. So just be prepared when you're stopped in the street, a torch and a pitchfork.
Do you have an opening date for when this might start?
I don't. It's all being turned over to Jen. They're working on it. I didn't get to go to the Zoom meeting the other day because I had a C-Park meeting, and I don't know what the outcome of that was. But I assume they're trying to hire up people to man or woman this whole project. I really doubt that they're going to get 45 people in there. And now that the issue downtown is being solved, or supposedly solved, then I'm feeling much better that someone's not going to try and sneak a busload of them out here. So sort of where I am on it.
Okay, so for myself, if there was a busload of people coming out here, I would be stopping the bus. So I've made it clear that this is for Sault residents and not to bring in, we don't have the support to bring in folks from other places. We're lucky that we have the support that we have, and the support is coming in only to match up with the folks that we have out this way. So if there's a busload, I'll be stopping that bus.
Yeah, and I'll be right alongside you.
Okay, good, thank you. And I appreciate all of you. There's been a number of different queries coming in different ways. So I just want to express my gratitude to those of you that are out answering them, whether they're emails or Facebook or so forth and the like, just because there has been a number of them. And I think part of it is just how it played out in the media with featuring cameras sort of on the Topaz Park. Oh, and then meanwhile in Sault, here's what we're doing, right? So when viewers see that together, they're like, what is council thinking here? Because of the way it plays, when that actually isn't the case. But now that I think there's more information, there are some people naturally that are very concerned. But I think that as more information gets out there, it's like, okay, and we have another meeting scheduled. I want to see regular meetings so that we understand what's going on. We can share community concerns and then also hear and do some storytelling in terms of what's actually occurring on site. Other comments from members of council? Anything to report? Jeff, would you like to share some news?
Yeah, I'll share what you shared at 1 o'clock today, which is that the library board met on Saturday, and we got the news that 10 contractors have submitted pre-qualification applications. And so that'll be the short list that they'll choose the final, the winner of the bid from. And once that happens, they anticipate breaking ground, I hate to say, but maybe in summer. And then a year to a year and a half later, it will be complete. And beyond that, I've stocked up on stick coffee now that they're open again for occasionally. And tomorrow I will go to the grocery store with a desire for like this cheese stuffed crust frozen pizza, which I've been dreaming about. Carolyn's not so thrilled about it, but okay, anyway, beyond that, that's it. Good night.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. Other comments from members of council? Councillor McMath?
I just wanted to say thank you for everybody's patience as I transition to my new job. It's extremely long hours. And so I sometimes am coming a little bit late, but that's literally because I take one headset off and then pick up another. And so I just really appreciate like the group support in that transition. And then most of my volunteering has dried up, but one place where I'm not volunteering but still donating is the Canadian Blood Services group. And because of COVID, donations have dropped substantially, but there's actually a really, really high need right now. So you're still able to donate. So I encourage anyone, especially since a lot of people have the time, you're not showing symptoms, to go and donate. There's mobile clinics, but you can always book an appointment at downtown Victoria.
Thank you very much for that reminder, Councillor McMath. Most of the updates I shared in my address from chambers that occurred here at 1 o'clock. You don't have to watch it, but there is a written summary that also goes out if you just want to glance at that. But most of it is all stuff that you know, because it's sort of summarizing what goes out in all the media releases. And then I add a couple of bits here and there. Mainly we're just at an interesting point for advocacy work that we're doing, so looking forward to seeing how that comes out. You may know that the Chamber of Commerce has launched its Better Buy Souk campaign. So this is sort of like an online shopping local opportunity where local businesses can actually have sort of a virtual storefront. Given that so many folks are still buying online on via Amazon, there is a way to tie into the online market and actually to support local businesses here in the community. So it's growing in numbers, so I would recommend checking that out. And the other piece is, you may know that the BC Achievement Foundation has awarded community recognition this year to our retired chief, Steve Sorensen. So that news release has gone public this afternoon. So I'm very excited, and congratulations to Steve Sorensen. And I'll just end today with a shout out to our Centurion, which is Mr. Ed Banner, who celebrated his 100th birthday today. And there was quite a parade of vehicles. Would have loved to have joined it, but I was tied up on the phone, unfortunately, at that time. And otherwise, I think that summarizes our meeting for tonight. So thank you, everyone. And I'll call for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor McMath and seconded by Councillor St-Pierre. Okay, so keep healthy, everyone, and we'll see you back here for our next regular meeting. I think we're still going to be meeting in this way for a while, but hopefully not too much longer, because I do miss, you know, everyone actually being in chambers. I think it's just a different conversation. I just find it I find Zoom challenging, obviously, the best of times. So May 11th, and we'll see what format that looks like. Okay, so take care, everyone. I'll call